It was a typical autumn morning in New York, with the cold wind cutting through the bustling streets of Manhattan. The heavy traffic and the noise of taxis mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee, creating the typical morning symphony of the city that never sleeps. Emily Donovan, a determined young woman, stared at her reflection in the subway window as she adjusted her impeccably styled blonde hair. She was anxious, and anyone who knew her would recognize that her nervous tick was a rare sight. Emily worked as a marketing analyst at one of the largest technology companies in the United States, Donovan and Greer Solutions, a multinational giant aiming to be the biggest in the country. But what no one knew was that she also led a double life. Today, once again, she was going to stand in for her best friend, Megan Turner, on a blind date. Megan, a chef and owner of a famous restaurant in Brooklyn, was tired of being pressured by her family to find the perfect match. So, she had convinced Emily, as she had done many times before, to go in her place on one of these dates, using the excuse that she was too busy. Emily, despite hating these situations, could never say no to her friend, especially when she looked at her with that confident smile. "It's just a quick dinner, Megan had said with a mischievous smile the night before. "You go in, eat something, and say there's no chemistry. Easy." But this time, something was different. As she entered the upscale restaurant on the Upper East Side, Emily realized this was not just any ordinary date. The place was exclusive, with glass walls offering a stunning view of Central Park. Inside, everything looked expensive, as if every detail had been meticulously planned to impress. Sitting at the table Megan had pointed out, Emily noticed that the man she was supposed to meet was only a few meters away. And there he was, Henry Collins, the CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the technology sector, Collins Enterprises. Emily recognized him immediately from an interview he had given last month for Forbes. The air of authority in his posture, the custom-made suit, the sharp gaze, and his perfectly combed dark hair made him unmistakable. He wasn't just a successful CEO. Henry was ruthless, known for being cold in business and feared by his competitors. No one could take his focus off expanding the empire his father had built. But what on earth was a man like Henry doing there on a blind date? Emily knew she had to stay calm. If Henry discovered that she wasn't who she claimed to be, the consequences could be disastrous, especially because she was stepping into enemy territory. Collins Enterprises and Donovan and Greer were direct rivals, always competing for the same million-dollar contracts. "Hello, Megan, right?" Henry said, with a voice that seemed a mix of authority and curiosity as he sat down at the table. "Yes, Megan Turner," Emily replied, doing her best to imitate her friend's confidence. She couldn't fail now. During the first few minutes of the conversation, Emily was surprised at how easily she managed to keep up the facade. Henry was an enigma. While his presence was intimidating, there was something about him that suggested a man trapped by the expectations of the corporate world, someone carrying an immense burden of responsibility. He seemed genuinely interested in the conversation, but at one careless moment, he mentioned something that almost made Emily choke on her wine. "My grandfather founded Collins Enterprises, but he always believed that success was maintained by keeping people under control," Henry said, in a tone that seemed to reflect an internal conflict. "But I don't think that's everything. I'd like to change that philosophy if I could." Emily was surprised. This was an unexpected revelation from a man who embodied the ruthless CEO stereotype. Maybe Henry wasn't just a villain in the story. However, as they continued talking, Emily noticed something even more alarming. Henry, with his sharp gray eyes, seemed to recognize some detail about her. The way he observed her, the brief moments of hesitation, all indicated that he was beginning to suspect something. "You know, you're very different from what I imagined, Megan," he commented, leaning back in his chair, clearly intrigued. "I thought you'd be more predictable." Emily smiled nervously, trying to deflect the attention. "I think people are more complicated than they seem, right?" The night continued with that tension in the air. Both played cautiously, as if they knew they were dealing with more than just a casual date. When the dinner finally ended, Henry unexpectedly did something that made Emily even more uncomfortable. "Can I see you again?" he asked, with a slight smile that, though controlled, seemed genuine. Emily didn't know how to respond. This was more than she had signed up for by being there. Megan had never mentioned that the man would be so sharp, and now it was clear that this was far from just another unimportant date. I can't get involved with him, Emily thought desperately. He's the CEO of Collins, the company we're trying to take down. But at the same time, something intrigued her about the man. Could it be that he wasn't the villain everyone said he was? And how could she get out of this without revealing the lie she was caught up in? With her heart racing, Emily smiled at Henry, hesitantly, and replied, "Sure, I'd love to." Little did she know that that simple yes would put her at the center of a power game far bigger than she ever imagined. The next morning, Emily woke up with a mixture of regret and growing anxiety. The phone in her hand displayed messages from Megan, who had already asked about the date. They had planned a quick exchange of information, but how could Emily explain what had happened? She hesitated before replying, typing and deleting several times until a notification interrupted her thoughts. A message from Henry Collins. "I really enjoyed last night. Let's do it again soon. Henry." Emily looked at the screen as if it was about to explode. She knew she needed to talk to Megan immediately. But how would her best friend react when she found out that she was now on the radar of one of New York's most powerful CEOs? Sighing, she grabbed the phone and called Megan. Tell me everything. How did it go?" Megan answered with the usual excitement that Emily dreaded. "Megan, you're not going to believe this," Emily began, pacing nervously around her Brooklyn apartment's living room. "The guy you set me up with wasn't just some random guy. He's Henry Collins, CEO of Collins Enterprises." There was an uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line before Megan finally spoke, her voice quieter. "Henry Collins? As in the Henry Collins?" Megan sounded incredulous. "Yes, the one and only. And he wants to see me again." Megan let out a short laugh, clearly incredulous and confused at the same time. "Oh my God, Emily, what are you going to do? He thinks you're me." Emily bit her lower lip, feeling the pressure of every word from her friend. What was she going to do? Megan was right. She had assumed her friend's identity to make the situation easier, but now she was neck deep in something much bigger. Henry wasn't just a charming and wealthy man. He was the head of Donovan and Greer Solutions' biggest rival. "I don't know, Megan. He sent me a message just a little while ago saying he enjoyed last night and wants to meet again. I can't see him again. What if he finds out who I really am?" Megan laughed, but concern quickly mingled with her amusement. Okay. This is more complicated than I thought. But look, you can just tell him you don't want to continue. In it now. Nothing bad has happened yet." Emily took a deep breath, shaking her head as she tried to organize her thoughts. "I know that's the right thing to do, but there's something about him." She hesitated. "He's not what I expected. I mean, he doesn't seem like the ruthless type everyone says he is." "Be careful, Em. That's what CEOs do. They manipulate. He's the head of Collins Enterprises. He has to be ruthless." Megan tried to warn her, but her voice had a playful tone. "You're right, I just need some time to think," Emily replied, ending the call shortly after. She couldn't help it, but something about Henry intrigued her. She spent the day trying to focus on work, but her thoughts were completely consumed by the events of the previous night. Every time her phone vibrated, she felt a chill in her stomach, expecting it to be a message from Henry or Megan. As the afternoon approached, the inevitable happened. Henry sent another message. "There's a charity dinner this Friday. I'd love to see you there." She read and reread the message several times until, finally, she made a decision that might be the riskiest of her life. She knew she had to face the problem head on. Attending the event and putting an end to it seemed like the only solution. Yet a part of her, the part that was curious, the part intrigued by Henry, couldn't help but wonder. What if she was wrong? What if Henry was different than she thought? On Friday night, Emily found herself once again in a place that looked straight out of a movie. The Waldorf Astoria was in full swing for the annual charity event, which brought together New York's top figures, from investors to influential philanthropists. She wore an elegant black dress, rented especially for the occasion, with her hair styled in a sophisticated updo. It was the kind of event she saw on the news, but never imagined she'd be inside, part of the circle. Stepping into the ballroom felt like entering another world. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the space, and the soft sounds of an orchestra played in the background as waiters served champagne on silver trays. And, in the midst of the crowd, there he was, Henry Collins, in an impeccable tuxedo, seemed to be in control, greeting guests with his unshakable charm. Emily couldn't help but feel like an intruder, a piece out of place. Her heart raced as she approached Henry, rehearsing her words in her head. She needed to tell the truth. She needed to tell him that she wasn't who he thought she was. But when he saw her, something unexpected happened. "Megan, you look stunning." He smiled, taking her hand with a gentleness that caught her by surprise. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but the words escaped her. Instead, she smiled nervously. "Thank you, Henry." Damn it, she thought, cursing herself for not being able to speak the truth. Throughout the night, Henry introduced her to various important people, some of whom were part of contracts Donovan and Greer was trying to close. The more time passed, the more Emily realized she was immersed in a very dangerous game. She was surrounded by people who, if they found out who she really was, could destroy not only her career but also her company's reputation. When she finally got a moment alone with Henry, on the hotel terrace, she took a deep breath. The night breeze cooled her skin, and the city lights sparkled on the horizon. "Henry, I need to tell you something." She tried to stay calm, though her voice betrayed her anxiety. He looked at her with curiosity, sensing the seriousness on her face. "What is it?" Emily hesitated for a moment, looking out at the horizon. Every fiber of her being wanted to tell the truth, but something about Henry stopped her. The way he looked at her, as if she were the only person that mattered in that moment, made her heart beat faster. She began, but was interrupted by the ringing of her phone. Emily looked at the screen and saw Megan's name. The perfect excuse. "I need to take this," she said, stepping away for a moment. Answering the call, Megan was already talking non-stop on the other end of the line, unaware that she had interrupted a crucial moment. "Megan, I need to hang up. I'll call you later," Emily said urgently. "Wait, Emily," Megan exclaimed, her voice filled with concern. "I don't think you should tell him." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" "I was thinking, if you tell the truth now, he might think it's a ploy to spy on his company. He's a businessman, Em. He'll think you're a Donovan and Greer spy trying to uncover secrets. You need to play this carefully. If you're too direct, it might hurt you, and maybe me too." Megan's words froze Emily. Megan was right. Henry might think it was all part of a scheme. Maybe it was best to keep up the lie for a little longer, just until she could understand his intentions better and get out of this without ruining everything. Sighing, she returned to the terrace, where Henry was waiting. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his deep voice filling the silence. Emily forced a smile and nodded. "Yes, everything's fine." The moment had passed, and for now, the truth would remain buried. In the days following the charity event, Emily lived through an emotional roller coaster. Each meeting with Henry felt like a dangerous dance between maintaining appearances and a truth that was becoming harder to conceal. They exchanged a few messages, and Henry continued to show interest in getting to know her better, which only added to the pressure Emily felt. She knew that the longer it went on, the harder it would be to tell the truth. At Donovan and Greer, the tension in the air was palpable. A new technology contract was about to be closed, and there were strong rumors that Collins Enterprises was in the running to win the bid. As a marketing analyst, Emily knew that her company couldn't afford to lose that contract. However, her growing involvement with Henry put her in a delicate position. She couldn't allow crucial information to slip by accident. That Monday afternoon, while Emily was reviewing a presentation for her boss, Mike Donovan, the company's co-founder, she received an unexpected message from Henry. "Lunch today? There's a new restaurant I'd like to show you." Emily looked at her phone, biting her lip as she thought about how to respond. She was so caught up in preparing the presentation that she almost felt tempted to decline. But something inside her knew that turning him down too often might raise suspicions. Taking a deep breath, she quickly replied, "Sure, I can take an hour." She discreetly left the office just before noon, avoiding the curious looks of her colleagues who were already commenting on her recent disappearances. When she arrived at the restaurant, a small and cozy bistro in West Village, Henry was already waiting for her at a discreet table in the corner, away from prying eyes. "I'm starting to think you're never busy," Henry teased, standing to greet her with a charming smile. Emily laughed nervously, feeling uncomfortable with the lie that was deepening with each encounter. "I just manage my time well," she replied, trying to keep the conversation light. Sitting at the table, They began talking about trivial things. The soft background music and the aroma of the red wine Henry had ordered created an intimate atmosphere that, for some reason, made Emily even more uneasy. "You know, there's something I've always wanted to ask," Henry said suddenly, changing the tone of the conversation. He seemed hesitant, but at the same time determined. Emily felt a tightening in her chest. This was the moment. He was going to uncover the lie. "What is it?" she asked, trying to sound nonchalant. I'm curious about your family." He looked at her intently. "You never talk much about them. What's your relationship with your family like?" Emily internally sighed with relief. It wasn't what she feared, but it was still a difficult question to answer. Megan came from a traditional family with demanding parents and high expectations. Emily, on the other hand, was the daughter of divorced parents who lived in different states, and her relationship with them was distant. How could she answer something so personal without giving away the lie? "Oh, my parents," she hesitated, trying to buy some time. "I have a complicated relationship with them. Actually, they're very demanding and always expect the best from me. But we get along for the most part." She tried to sound convincing, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice that Henry seemed to pick up on. "I see," he said, with a look that seemed to carefully study her words. "I also had a complicated relationship with my father. When he passed, I felt like there were a lot of unresolved issues between us." The revelation took Emily by surprise. Henry rarely talked about himself on a personal level. This was a rare opportunity to see beyond the ruthless CEO facade he projected to the world. "That must have been tough for you," Emily responded softly. "Losing someone like that, especially with so many things left unsaid." Henry nodded, and for a moment, the air between them grew heavy, filled with unspoken emotions. He seemed like he wanted to say more, but held back. "It was complicated, yes. My father believed in a style of leadership that I never fully accepted," Henry confessed, seemingly finally lowering his guard. He thought people needed to be controlled, dominated, to achieve success in business. "I never agreed with that, but when you inherit something so big, it's hard to change everything." Emily listened carefully, surprised by the depth of Henry's words. Behind that cold, controlled exterior was a man grappling with the expectations and pressure of a family legacy, something that, in a way, resonated with her. "Do you think about changing that?" Emily asked, curious about how far Henry was willing to go with his confession. He smiled slightly, but it was a melancholy smile. "I'm trying, but the corporate world doesn't make it easy. Every day is a battle to stay on top, and people expect you to be ruthless. It's not easy to balance that and try to be human." Henry's sincerity touched Emily. For the first time, she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about him. Could it be that Henry Collins, the man who supposedly represented everything she hated about the business world, was more complex than he seemed? Before she could respond, her phone vibrated with a new message. It was from Mike Donovan, the co-founder of Donovan and Greer. "We need to talk. The contract with the tech firm has been postponed. Call me as soon as you can." Emily's heart raced. The contract. She couldn't afford to be distracted now. She needed to get back to work and find out what was going on. "Henry, I have to go. There's an emergency at work," she said hastily. Henry seemed disappointed, but understanding. "Of course. I hope everything works out." Emily quickly said her goodbyes and left the restaurant with her heart in her throat. As much as she was drawn to Henry, the weight of reality was beginning to set in. She was living a lie, and sooner or later, it was going to come back to haunt her. Back at the office, Emily went straight into Mike Donovan's office, where he was in a meeting with other members of the leadership team. The tension in the air was almost palpable. "Emily, I'm glad you're here," Mike said, motioning for her to join them. "We've received some troubling news. The contract with Technova has been delayed, and there are rumors that Collins Enterprises is involved." Emily felt a chill down her spine. That couldn't be a coincidence. Was Henry trying to steal the contract right out from under them? They haven't confirmed anything officially, but the bidding process has been postponed indefinitely, Mike continued. "That means we need to step up our efforts. Collins Enterprises isn't going to give up easily, and we need everything we've got to stay ahead." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She was at the center of a massive corporate battle, and now she was more entangled than she had ever imagined. With Henry being a direct rival and her personal interests growing, the line between duty and desire was starting to blur dangerously. As the meeting progressed, Emily knew she had to make a decision soon. She couldn't continue with a lie any longer. But revealing the truth could destroy not only her career, but also the growing connection she was feeling with Henry. What was she going to do? Give in to the pressure of her job, or risk everything for a feeling that was only just beginning to form? One thing she knew for sure, from that moment on, every step would be a risky move in a game where secrets and loyalties were at stake. And she knew that once she made her decision, there would be no turning back. The days following the postponement of the Technova contract were chaotic. At Donovan and Greer, the tension was palpable. Everyone knew that losing that contract would be a devastating blow to the company. Emily threw herself into work, trying to make up for her guilt for getting emotionally involved with Henry Collins, the man who increasingly seemed like her greatest enemy and, at the same time, an irresistible distraction. The meetings with Henry continued, but now each one carried a heavier emotional weight. Emily found herself trapped in a web of secrets and lies, torn between her duty to her company and the growing connection with Henry. Every time he looked her in the eye, she felt the weight of the truth she was hiding. One Friday afternoon, after an exhausting meeting about strategies to secure the contract, Emily was at her desk finishing reports when she received a message from Henry. "Dinner on the rooftop of the Standard? We need to talk." She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the words. Henry rarely asked to talk so directly. What did he have in mind? Had he discovered her real identity? Later that same day, Emily found herself in the elevator of one of Manhattan's most sophisticated buildings, on her way to the rooftop of the Standard, a hotel known for its luxury and discretion. When the elevator doors opened, she was greeted by a breathtaking view of the city, illuminated by the skyscraper's lights and the glow of the Hudson River. Henry was there, on the terrace, already waiting for her. He wore a dark suit that made him even more imposing under the soft lights of the setting. Emily's heart raced as she approached him, aware that, at some point that night, the truth would have to come out. "You look beautiful," he said, with a soft smile, but one that carried evident tension. "Thank you," Emily replied, forcing a smile as she sat at the table. The waiter brought a bottle of red wine, but Emily barely touched her glass. Her mind was focused on every move Henry made, every word he said. "I've been thinking a lot over the past few days," Henry began, looking directly into her eyes. "About you, and about us." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. This was it. He knew. "And what did you conclude?" she asked, trying to stay calm, but already bracing for the worst. Henry sighed, looking away for a brief moment before turning back to face her. "I feel like there's something you're not telling me, Megan." The false name sounded like a dagger to Emily. Guilt and fear paralyzed her for a second, but she knew she couldn't keep this up any longer. "Henry, She hesitated, struggling against the tide of emotions rising inside her. "I'm not who you think I am." Henry frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Emily took a deep breath. There was no turning back. She had to tell the truth. "My name isn't Megan Turner. I'm Emily Donovan." She paused, waiting for him to process the information. "I work at Donovan and Greer Solutions." The shock was visible on Henry's face. He blinked a few times, as if trying to understand what he was hearing. The silence that followed was unbearable. "You work for Donovan and Greer?" Henry asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Emily nodded, feeling the weight of the revelation crash down on her shoulders. "Yes, I'm a marketing analyst there. Megan is my best friend, and she asked me to go on that date in her place, just because she was tired of those arranged dates." She tried to keep her voice steady, but the guilt and anxiety were clear. "I never imagined I would meet you, or that things would go this far." Henry remained silent for a few moments, processing the information. He leaned back in his chair, and his expression shifted from confusion to something darker. "So, you've been lying to me this whole time?" His voice was now cold, filled with disappointment. "It wasn't intentional," Emily exclaimed, desperately trying to explain. "At first, it was just a silly thing, a favor for a friend. But when I realized who you were, I didn't know how to stop. And then things got more complicated with the contract and our relationship." Henry rubbed his hand over his face, clearly frustrated. "You knew what was at stake?" And yet you continued with this charade? He looked directly at her, and Emily felt the weight of the accusation. I swear, I never intended to hurt you, she said, feeling the tears welling up. I didn't share any information with my company. I would never do that. How can I trust you now? Henry asked, his voice low but filled with resentment. How do I know you weren't just playing me the whole time? Those words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. She knew that, for Henry, trust was everything. Not only did he feel betrayed by her, but he was also likely grappling with the fact that he had opened up and shared personal details of his life with someone he now saw as an enemy. I care about you, Henry. This wasn't a game to me, she whispered, almost unable to look at him. I wanted to tell you the truth from the start, but I was afraid. I knew that if I told you, I would lose you. Henry stared at her for long seconds, his face expressionless, but his eyes said everything. Pain, disappointment, and a deep distrust. Maybe you've already lost me, Emily, he finally said, standing up from the table. I need time to think. Emily felt her heart shatter as she watched Henry walk away. He headed toward the exit without looking back. She was left there, alone, feeling the overwhelming weight of the consequences of her choices. The following week, Emily tried to stay focused on work, but her mind was constantly on what had happened with Henry. She didn't know if he would forgive her or if it had been the end of everything. The guilt and anxiety consumed her, but she knew she had made the right decision by telling the truth. Mike Donovan called an emergency meeting on Friday, gathering all the company's leaders to discuss the new status of the Technova contract. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew that Collins Enterprises was getting closer to closing the deal, and Donovan and Greer was at a disadvantage. We've received information that Collins is offering an aggressive proposal, Mike said, pacing back and forth in the meeting room. We need a strategy to give us an advantage, and fast. Emily knew this was a reflection of the pressure Henry was putting on his company. Now it was war. She wasn't just someone who had lied to him. She was part of the rival company he needed to bring down. When the meeting ended, Emily approached Mike. Mike, we need to be strategic here. If we're too aggressive, we might lose Technova's trust, she suggested, trying to remain calm. Mike looked at her with a serious expression. Emily, we're at war now. We can't afford to misstep. Collins Enterprises will do everything to take us down. She knew he was right, but at the same time, she knew that this war was now personal. Back at her desk, Emily stared out the window, thinking about Henry. Had he made his decision yet? Would he be able to separate his personal feelings from the corporate battle that was underway? She knew that, at some point, she would have to face him again, not just as a woman who had hurt him, but as a rival in the business world. And she had no idea how it would end. The days blurred together for Emily. Between the pressure at work and the emotional weight of her break with Henry, she could barely keep her head straight. Collins Enterprises continued to push forward full force with the Technova contract, and Donovan and Greer was feeling the heat. Emily knew that the company's strategic meetings had a clear goal: to find a loophole to defeat Henry's aggressive proposal, no matter the cost. But what no one at Donovan and Greer knew was that Emily was caught in a personal storm. She had made a mistake, and now, the man she was beginning to admire and develop true feelings for saw her as the enemy. Henry hadn't contacted her since the rooftop dinner, and his silence was a constant reminder that she was alone in this battle. By Friday of that week, Donovan and Greer's office was buzzing. It was the last day to submit the final proposal to Technova, and Emily knew that this would define the company's future. She had worked tirelessly to ensure every detail of the presentation was perfect, but in the back of her mind, a cruel doubt lingered. How would Henry react when he received her company's proposal? During a pivotal meeting, Mike Donovan was more serious than ever. He looked at the team, fully aware of the pressure everyone was under. I want to remind everyone that this contract is crucial to our survival. We can't afford to make any mistakes, and we certainly can't waste time with distractions. If Collins Enterprises wins, it'll be a blow we may not recover from. Mike's voice echoed through the room. Emily nodded along with the rest of the team, but Mike's words seemed to hit her harder. After all, she was emotionally tied to the man leading the rival attack. When the meeting ended, Emily returned to her desk, reviewing the final proposal one last time before it would be sent in just a few hours. Her mind was fully focused until a notification appeared on her phone. It was a message from Henry. "We need to meet. It's important." Emily's heart raced. It had been days since Henry last spoke to her, and now, out of nowhere, he wanted to see her. The message was direct, no small talk, but it was clear he wanted to discuss something important. She knew that conversation could change everything or end what little remained between them for good. Without hesitation, she replied with a short message. "Where and when?" Henry didn't take long to respond. "My penthouse. 8 p.m. Bring whatever you need to explain yourself." Emily felt a knot in her stomach. He was demanding answers, and she couldn't run anymore. At 8 p.m. sharp, Emily stood at the entrance of Henry's luxurious building. The doorman, already familiar with her, greeted her with a discreet nod and let her in. The déjà vu washed over her, reminding her of the first time she'd been there, when everything felt new, and Henry was just a mysterious man she was starting to connect with. But now, the tension was palpable. The elevator smoothly ascended to the penthouse, and when the doors opened, Henry was already waiting, standing by the massive window with a breathtaking view of New York City. "Henry," Emily began, hesitantly, but he raised his hand, asking for silence. "I need to know one thing, Emily," he said, his voice cold and emotionless. "Were you spying for Donovan and Greer?" Emily froze. She knew that question was coming at some point, but hearing Henry's voice, it felt like a punch to the gut. "No," she responded vehemently. "I never did that. I never gave them any information. Henry, my involvement with you, it was real. It wasn't a game." Henry studied her with a mixture of doubt and pain in his eyes. He had seen so many betrayals in the business world that trusting anyone now was difficult for him. "You understand how this looks to me, right?" he asked, his voice calculated and cold. "You lie about who you are, show up in my life just as our companies are competing for a multi-million-dollar contract, and you expect me to believe it was all a coincidence?" Emily felt the tears welling up in her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She needed to stay strong. "I understand how it looks, Henry, but I swear, it wasn't about the contract. In the beginning, it was just a favor for a friend, but I started to care about you." Her voice cracked slightly, but she held his gaze. "If I wanted to sabotage you, I would have done it already. I never used anything you told me against you." Henry remained silent for a moment, his eyes scanning Emily's face as if trying to decipher the truth in her words. "I want to believe you, Emily, but I can't ignore what's at stake here. I grew up in this world, I know how it works. And now, we're in the middle of a war. We can't trust anyone blindly." Emily nodded slowly, understanding what he was saying. But there was something deeper in those words. "This is about more than the contract, isn't it?" she asked, her voice soft. "It's about your father, about his legacy, and about who you want to be." Henry looked at her in surprise. He hadn't expected her to bring up his family issues so openly. "My father believed trust was a weakness," Henry began, his voice softer now. "He said that to be successful, you had to control everything and everyone around you. I grew up with that, and it shaped the way I handle business and people." "And do you think that's right?" Emily asked, stepping a little closer. "I don't know," Henry admitted, with a pained expression. "Sometimes I think he was wrong, but it's hard to change when you've grown up believing that was the only way to win." Emily's heart tightened. She could see that, behind the facade of the ruthless CEO, Henry was a man in conflict, someone who wanted more than just winning corporate battles. "You can be different, Henry. You don't have to follow in his footsteps," she said gently. "I didn't betray you, and if you give me a chance, I can prove it." Henry stepped closer, looking deeply into Emily's eyes. There was a mix of distrust and vulnerability in his expression. "You know what's at stake here. If we're wrong, we could destroy what's left between us," he said, his voice now low, almost a whisper. Emily nodded, understanding the risk they were both taking. "I know, but I'm willing to try," she replied, sincerely. Henry remained silent for a few seconds before finally speaking. "Tomorrow, Collins Enterprises will submit its final proposal to Technova. If you're truly not trying to hurt me, don't interfere." Emily blinked, surprised by the frankness of his statement. "You're asking me to betray my company?" she asked, somewhat incredulously. Henry shook his head, his expression firm. "No, I'm asking you not to play against me." Emily stood still for a long moment, considering the weight of his words. She knew she was at a turning point both in her personal and professional life. The choice she made in the next few hours could change everything. "I need to think about it," she finally said, unsure if she could make the right decision. Henry simply nodded, not pressuring her. He knew that whatever choice she made, everything would be different from that moment on. The next morning, Emily woke up with a heavy heart. Donovan and Greer's presentation was scheduled for 11 a.m., and she knew she needed to be at the office early for the final preparations. But Henry's words echoed in her mind. "Don't play against me." It was impossible not to think about the implications of his request. When she arrived at the office, Mike Donovan was already waiting for her, reviewing the final details with the team. "Emily, I want you to lead the presentation. You're on top of everything, and I trust you to close this contract," Mike said, with unwavering confidence. Emily nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility grow even more. She knew what needed to be done to secure the company's victory. But at the same time, Henry's words were still echoing in her mind. As the hours passed and the meeting with Technova approached, Emily knew she had to make a decision. The contract would define Donovan and Greer's future, and Henry was counting on her not to interfere. Her loyalty was divided. She took a deep breath, looking at the computer screen with the final presentation. It was now or never. The clock struck 10:30, and Donovan and Greer's office was in a state of control frenzy. Everyone was focused, reviewing details and ensuring that nothing was left to chance. But Emily felt an internal battle brewing inside her. The company's final presentation for Technova was happening in just a few minutes, and she knew she was about to make a decision that could change the course of her career and her life. Henry's words continued to resonate in her mind. "Don't play against me." Emily felt the weight of those words with even more intensity now, as she watched her colleagues rushing to make sure everything was perfect. She knew that the choice she made at that moment wouldn't just affect her future, but everyone's. "What am I doing?" she thought, as she tried to focus on the presentation she was about to lead. Her mind, however, refused to calm down. It was as if a storm was about to erupt inside her. A part of her knew that if she played all her cards against Collins Enterprises, Henry might never forgive her. But, on the other hand, she had a duty to the company that had embraced her and helped her grow. Mike Donovan entered the meeting room with a confident expression. He had a habit of showing unshakable calm, even in high-pressure situations. "Emily, are we ready?" he asked, smiling at her. "I'm sure you'll impress them." Emily smiled back, but it was a tense smile. She knew she had to appear confident, even if she felt torn inside. "Yes, everything's ready," she said, forcing a confident tone. As the minutes passed, the group of Technova executives finally arrived. 4 middle-aged men, dressed in elegant suits, with expressions indicating they were ready for a serious business discussion. They exchanged polite greetings, and soon the presentation began. Emily led the presentation masterfully. She had rehearsed every slide, every data point, and every argument. Her voice was clear, her hands steady, and her posture was impeccable. To her colleagues and the Technova executives, she seemed confident and in control. But inside, her mind was a whirlwind of uncertainties. As she progressed through the presentation, Emily began to realize the impact of her words. Donovan and Greer had, in fact, a competitive proposal, and she knew they were offering something unique to Technova. But at the same time, part of her knew that if her company won, Henry would lose much more than a contract. He would lose trust in himself, and perhaps in her. At the end of the presentation, there was a heavy silence. The Technova executives looked at each other, clearly impressed with the proposal, but still pondering their next steps. Mike, sitting next to Emily, smiled contentedly. He knew they had delivered their best. "You've given us a lot to consider," one of the Technova executives said, standing up. "We'll need a few days to review everything before we make our final decision." With that, they shook hands with everyone, thanking them for the presentation, and left the room. When the doors closed, there was a brief moment of quiet euphoria in the office. Everyone knew they had done their best. "Good job, team," Mike exclaimed, clearly pleased with the performance. "Emily, you were brilliant." She smiled, thanking him, but the euphoria didn't reach her. The doubt continued to gnaw at her inside. "I'm going to step out for a few minutes," she told Mike before leaving the meeting room. She needed air. Emily left the building and walked through the busy streets of Manhattan, trying to find some clarity. Taxis sped by, the lights from billboards flashing in every direction, but none of it seemed real to her at that moment. All she could think about was Henry and what would happen next. She pulled out her phone and, without thinking too much, called him. Henry answered after a few rings, his voice cold and controlled as always. "What did you decide?" He didn't waste time on formalities. Emily hesitated. Her heart was racing, as if each beat was louder than usual. "I made the presentation," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "I can't betray the company I work for, Henry." There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Henry finally spoke. "I figured as much," he said, his voice filled with disappointment, but also acceptance. "I won't pretend I'm not upset, Emily. I thought you could see beyond business. But I understand." She felt a tightness in her chest hearing Henry's words. He wasn't angry, but the coldness in his voice was a reminder that things between them were changing. "This isn't just about business, Henry," she said, almost in a whisper. "I'm truly sorry." "So am I," he replied, after a brief pause. "Maybe it's better this way, for both of us." And then, without another word, Henry hung up. Emily stood on the sidewalk, holding her phone, trying to process what had just happened. That call had broken something between them, something that might never be fixed. She knew that from now on, any personal relationship between them was on hold, or perhaps destroyed forever. In the days that followed, the office routine returned to normal, but the atmosphere between Emily and her colleagues was tense. Everyone was anxiously awaiting the outcome of Technova's decision. When the day of the response arrived, the entire team gathered in the conference room. Mike was on the phone, waiting for the call from Technova's director to announce the decision. The silence was almost unbearable as they waited. The phone finally rang, and Mike answered immediately, putting the call on speaker for everyone to hear. "It's a pleasure speaking with you again, Mike," said the Technova executive's voice on the other end of the line. "After careful consideration, we've decided that Collins Enterprises offered the best proposal. We'll be going with them." The impact was immediate. The room fell silent, the shock written on everyone's faces. Mike clenched his jaw, clearly frustrated but maintaining his composure. "I understand. Thank you for the opportunity to compete. I hope we can work together in the future," Mike said, in a professional tone, before ending the call. Once the line was cut, the disappointment filled the room. Donovan and Greer had lost the contract. Emily felt a mixture of relief and defeat. She had done her part, fought for the company, but somehow, losing to Henry brought an unexpected relief. It was as if, in the end, things had settled in the only way they could. Mike looked at Emily, his expression resigned but not angry. "We did our best. It just wasn't meant to be this time," he said, trying to keep the team's spirits up. Emily nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She knew that loss wasn't just in the business world but also in her personal life. That night, Emily walked alone through the streets of New York. The cold wind hit her face as she thought about everything that had happened. The loss of the contract, the break with Henry, the lies, the secrets. It all seemed to finally be coming to an end. She stopped by the edge of the Hudson River, looking out at the city's horizon, the lights reflecting on the water. Maybe in the end it was for the best. She knew Henry was moving on, just as she needed to, even if it hurt. But something inside her still resisted, a small hope that, maybe in the future, their paths would cross again, in a different way. As the dark waters reflected the distant lights, Emily took a deep breath and made a decision. Tomorrow would be a new day, and she was ready to move forward with, or without Henry Collins. The next morning arrived with a sense of emptiness for Emily. The New York sky was overcast, reflecting her somber mood. After Donovan and Greer's loss in the Technova contract, the office felt colder and more distant. Everyone there felt the weight of the loss. It was as if the company had taken a blow that would take time to heal. But for Emily, the wounds went beyond work. She knew that Henry had won, but his victory brought her no relief. Quite the opposite, it brought a heavier burden. The coldness with which he had ended the phone conversation left her feeling unmoored. The worst part wasn't losing the contract, it was losing Henry, losing the chance at something that might have been real, if not for the barrier of lies and distrust she had built herself. Emily threw herself into work in the following days, trying to distance herself emotionally from everything that had happened. The office was consumed with damage control meetings, discussions on how to bounce back from the loss, and plans to pursue new contracts. Even so, the impact of the defeat was visible in every person around her. "We need to pull ourselves together, everyone," Mike Donovan said in a morning meeting. He was visibly exhausted, but his posture remained firm. "This wasn't our only contract. We have others in the pipeline, and we need to focus on those. Collins Enterprises won this time, but that doesn't mean we're out of the game." Mike's words were encouraging, but Emily knew that the internal wounds would take longer to heal. That afternoon, while trying to focus on a new project, Emily received an unexpected email. It was a request for a meeting with Mike, scheduled for the end of the day. The serious tone of the message made her nervous. What did Mike want to talk to her about? Was there something more behind the contract loss? When the time for the meeting arrived, Emily walked into Mike's office, where he was waiting with a serious expression. He was standing by the window, as if lost in thought. "Mike, you wanted to see me?" Emily asked, hesitantly. Mike turned around, crossing his arms and studying her for a few seconds before speaking. "Emily, you did a great job on the Technova presentation. Honestly, I know the loss of the contract wasn't your fault," he began, his voice firm but with a touch of understanding. "However, I need to be direct with you about something sensitive." Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. There was something in Mike's voice that indicated this conversation wouldn't be easy. "We've received information that Collins Enterprises knew some details of our proposal before the meeting even happened." He paused, carefully watching her reaction. "That's raised some suspicions." Emily's heart raced. She looked at Mike, incredulous. "You're saying you think I gave them information?" she asked, feeling a mix of shock, fear, and anger. Mike raised one hand, signaling for calm. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Emily, but we need to be cautious. I know you were involved with Henry Collins," he said, choosing his words carefully. "And now, with this situation, we need to make sure there wasn't any unintentional information leak." Emily froze for a moment, feeling the injustice of those words. She knew she had never betrayed Donovan and Greer, but the mere fact that she had been involved with Henry now cast suspicion on her. "Mike, I would never give him any information. No matter what happened between us, I am loyal to this company," she said, her voice firm and determined. Mike looked at her for a few more seconds, assessing her sincerity. "I believe you, Emily, but, as you can imagine, we need to handle these suspicions transparently." He paused before continuing. "Until this situation is fully resolved, I think it's best for you to take a few days off." Emily blinked, surprised. "Are you pushing me away?" "I'm not pushing you away," Mike quickly corrected. "I'm asking you to take some time for yourself. You've been working hard, and honestly, we all need a break. This isn't a punishment. It's just a measure to ensure the team stays focused and that we handle all of this properly." Emily felt the ground fall out from under her feet. Although Mike was trying to soften the situation, she knew this was a way to put her in quarantine. The suspicions were there, hanging over her, and it hurt deeply. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. "All right, Mike, I'll take a few days off," she said, with a forced calmness. Mike nodded. "This is temporary, Emily. We'll resolve this issue soon. Just trust me." Emily left Mike's office feeling a mixture of frustration and sadness. She had given everything to the company, and now she was being sidelined for something she hadn't done. Worse still, it was the shadow of Henry that hung over her professional life. In the following days, Emily tried to make the most of her time away from work, but the feeling of being unjustly punished wouldn't leave her in peace. She spent her afternoons walking through the city, trying to clear her mind. Every moment, she thought of Henry. Did he know about the suspicions surrounding her? Did he realize how much his victory had cost her? One afternoon, while walking through Central Park, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. With her heart racing, she answered. "Hello? Emily, it's me, Henry." His voice hit her like a shock. She stopped in her tracks, feeling a mix of emotions, from relief to deep pain. "Henry, what do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We need to talk," he said, his voice serious but with a touch of urgency. "It's not about the contract. It's about us." Emily hesitated. She had spent days trying to distance herself emotionally from him, trying to move on. But hearing Henry's voice brought back all the feelings she had tried to bury. "I don't know if talking will change anything," she replied honestly. "It might not, but we need to try." He paused, and then his voice softened. "Please, Emily." She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. There were so many things left unsaid between them, so many conflicting emotions. Maybe she needed this conversation just as much as he did. "All right, where and when?" she asked, feeling her stomach tighten. Henry sighed in relief on the other end of the line. "Tonight, my apartment. Can we meet at 7?" Emily agreed, and after hanging up, she felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. What did Henry want to say? What did he hope to resolve with this conversation? The doubts kept echoing in her mind as she prepared for yet another evening that, she knew, could change everything once again. At 7, Emily arrived at Henry's building, already familiar with the way to the penthouse. When the elevator doors opened, she saw him standing in the same spot as last time, by the window, looking out over the city. He turned when he heard her enter, and for a moment, they stared at each other in silence, as if trying to gauge what would happen next. "Thank you for coming," he said, breaking the silence. "What do you want, Henry?" Emily asked, keeping her voice firm. She knew she needed to protect herself emotionally this time. Henry walked toward her, stopping a few feet away, his expression serious but vulnerable. "I need to be honest with you, and I think we should start over," he said, crossing his arms as if trying to protect himself from his own emotions. "When I first got involved with you, I admit I didn't know what to expect. I thought it was just another game, but it was different." Emily's heart raced, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I found myself trusting you in ways I've never trusted anyone before," he continued, his voice softer. "And when I found out you worked for Donovan and Greer, I felt betrayed. I thought it was just another business move. I never meant to betray you." Henry, Emily interrupted, her voice filled with emotion. "I lied at the beginning, yes, but I wasn't trying to use that against you." Henry nodded slowly, as if trying to absorb her words. "I believe you now," he said, surprising her. "But it took me a while to get there. And in the meantime, you ended up being hurt. I know your company put you on leave, and I have some responsibility for that." Emily stared at him, shocked by the admission. "You knew?" she asked, incredulous. Henry nodded, his gaze serious. "I knew. I heard rumors that your company was suspecting a leak, but I know you didn't do anything wrong." Emily felt a mix of anger and sadness. He knew everything, and yet, he hadn't done anything to stop her reputation from being tarnished. "So, why didn't you do anything?" she asked, her voice breaking. Henry took a deep breath, seeming to struggle with his own emotions. "Because I was confused and angry. But that's no excuse. I should have acted." He stepped closer, looking her in the eyes. "I'm here to fix this. I want you to know that I have nothing against you. And I want to try again." Emily was silent for a few seconds, absorbing his words. Part of her heart wanted to believe him, but another part was still too hurt to open up again. "Henry, I don't know if I can," she said hesitantly. "All of this has been too complicated, too painful. I don't know if I can trust you or myself in this." He nodded, seeming to understand the gravity of the situation. "I understand, and I don't expect everything to be resolved now. I just wanted you to know the truth." He stepped back, respecting the emotional distance she had placed between them. "I won't pressure you, but if you decide to try, I'll be here." Emily looked at him, seeing for the first time the vulnerability behind the powerful exterior. Henry wasn't just a ruthless CEO. He was someone, like her, trying to find a balance between the business world and the feelings growing between them. She took a deep breath, unsure if she was ready to take that step. But, for the first time in weeks, she felt that things were finally on the right track, even if it was a long and challenging road. "I'll think about it," she finally said, breaking the silence. Henry nodded, accepting her response, and as she prepared to leave, she knew that, no matter what happened, this was just the beginning of a new phase for both of them. Emily left Henry's penthouse with her mind filled with doubts. Even after their honest conversation, uncertainties still lingered in the air. His words, however, had affected her in a way she couldn't ignore. He had been honest, admitted his mistakes, and that was something rare in the world they both lived in. However, she wasn't sure if she was ready to risk her heart again. As she descended the stairs of the building, Emily realized her emotions were at war. Part of her wanted to go back, forgive him, and try again. But another part, the more rational one, knew that trusting Henry wouldn't be easy. There was so much at stake, and the wounds were still fresh. She needed time, and Henry seemed willing to give that to her. In the following weeks, Emily distanced herself from Donovan and Greer to reflect. Mike had assured her that the leave was temporary, but she knew that the shadow of suspicion still hung over her. Even though she hadn't done anything wrong, perception was everything in the corporate world, and her reputation was compromised. During that time, she found refuge in simple things: walks through Central Park, quiet breakfasts at small bistros, and peaceful nights in her Brooklyn apartment. It was a stark contrast to the frenetic pace she was used to, and as necessary as that break was, it didn't erase the unresolved questions that continued to hang over her head. One afternoon, while walking in the park, Emily received an unexpected call. It was Megan, her best friend, and the original reason this whole mess had started. Are you okay?" Megan asked, her voice concerned on the other end of the line. "Sort of," Emily replied, sitting down on a bench and watching the leaves fall from the trees around her. "Things aren't easy. I ended up being put on leave and I'm trying to deal with it all." Megan sighed. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I never thought things would get to this point when I asked you to take my place at that date. If I had known..." "It's not your fault," Emily said, cutting her off. "I made choices. I agreed to get involved with Henry, and now I'm dealing with the consequences." "And how are things with him?" Megan asked, her voice full of curiosity. "Are you two still talking?" Emily hesitated before answering. She knew the situation with Henry was delicate. "He reached out to me recently. We had a serious conversation, and, well, he wants to try again. But I don't know, Megan. I don't know if I'm ready to open myself up like that again. Not after everything that happened." Megan was silent for a few seconds before responding. "It's complicated, I know, but if you really like him, maybe it's worth trying. Only you can decide that, Em. But do what's best for you. Not for the company, not for Henry. For you." Megan's words echoed in Emily's mind. That was exactly what she needed to figure out. What would be best for her? Deep down, she knew that part of her wanted to give Henry a second chance. But that would mean facing the fear of being hurt again, the fear of trusting. And it wasn't an easy decision. The following week, Emily made the decision to return to work. Mike called for a meeting as soon as she arrived at the office, and the tension in the air was evident. As she entered the meeting room, she felt everyone's eyes on her, as if her presence was a reminder of the recent defeat. Mike was sitting at the table, with his usual serious expression. He motioned for her to sit, and began the meeting without preamble. "Emily, first of all, I want you to know that we believe in your loyalty. We conducted an internal investigation and found no evidence of information leaks. We know you didn't betray the company," he said, looking directly at her. The relief she felt was immediate, but there was something else in Mike's voice, a tone of hesitation that left her suspicious. However, he continued after discussing it with the board, "We've decided that it might be best for everyone if you take a role in another division, something that's not directly related to the current contracts." Emily felt a knot in her stomach. While Mike was choosing his words carefully, the message was clear. They still didn't fully trust her. Even though they concluded that she hadn't leaked any information, her connection to Henry remained a problem. "I understand," Emily said, trying to stay calm. "You need to do what's best for the company." Mike nodded. "We know this isn't fair, Emily, but we have to take precautions. I'm confident you'll shine in whatever role you take on." Despite his encouraging words, Emily knew this was a polite way to remove her from the front lines. They wanted her to stay, but far from the most critical business. It was a blow to her pride and her career, but also an inevitable consequence of the choices she had made. In the days that followed, Emily began to take on her new responsibilities, away from the major contracts. She dedicated herself to the new role, but couldn't shake the feeling that she was being underutilized. Still, she tried to stay focused, knowing that she needed to prove her worth again. Then, one quiet afternoon, while working on her new project, she received a surprising message. It was from Henry. "Dinner tomorrow? I still want to talk more about us." Emily stared at her phone screen, undecided. Part of her was willing to move on, forget everything that had happened between them, and focus solely on work. But another part, the part that felt something real for Henry, wanted to give him a chance to show that things could be different. Taking a deep breath, she replied, "All right, Where? The response came almost instantly. Italian restaurant in Soho, 8 o'clock. See you there. Emily knew that, no matter what happened at that dinner, her life was about to change again. She just didn't know if she was ready for the consequences. The next night, Emily arrived at the restaurant feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. The place was cozy, with soft lighting and an intimate atmosphere. Henry was already there, sitting at a table in the back, and when he saw her enter, he stood up with a shy smile. "Emily," he said, nodding. "Thanks for coming." "You're welcome," she replied, sitting down at the table. The ambience was pleasant, but the tension between them was palpable. After the waiter brought the menus and they placed their orders, Henry leaned slightly forward, his expression serious. "I've thought a lot about us over the past few weeks," he began, keeping his gaze fixed on her. "And I've come to the conclusion that I can't move on without trying to fix what happened between us." Emily listened in silence, letting him continue. "I know what happened in the past was complicated and painful, but I want a chance to do things differently. I really care about you, Emily, more than I imagined I could, and I want to try again if you do too." Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. It was a direct, honest proposal, but also a risky one. She knew that accepting would mean putting her heart on the line again, risking being hurt again. "I've thought a lot too," she finally said, her voice calm. "And despite everything that happened, I think I want to try too. But, Henry, we need to do this right. No secrets, no games." Henry nodded, clearly relieved by her response. "I agree. Let's start fresh. No lies, no manipulation." Emily felt a shy smile form on her lips. This was the chance they both needed, a fresh start. But she knew that, even though they had decided to try again, the road ahead would still be full of challenges. That night, as they talked about life, plans, and feelings, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Maybe, finally, they were ready to leave the past behind and build something real, something they both deserved. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that the future could be different. In the days that followed the dinner, Emily and Henry began rebuilding what they had lost. It wasn't easy. Despite both being willing to start over, there was a quiet tension between them, as if something could fall apart at any moment. But somehow, this fragility also brought new depth to the relationship. For the first time, they were opening up completely, without masks. Henry surprised her by being more vulnerable than she expected. He shared more about the impact his father's legacy had on him, the pressures he felt to keep Collins Enterprises at the top, even if it sometimes meant sacrificing parts of himself that he considered important. "My father always said that in business, you can't trust anyone. He taught me to be suspicious, to see everyone as a threat," Henry said one night, as they stood on the terrace of his penthouse, looking out over the lights of New York. "I think that's why I reacted the way I did when I found out who you were." Emily listened carefully, feeling the pain in his words. She was also learning to trust again, but knew that the scars from past betrayals would take time to heal. "I understand," she replied, with a hint of sadness in her voice. "But trust is the only way forward. We can't do this without believing in each other." Henry agreed, and from that moment on, the two made a conscious effort to leave the past behind. They began seeing each other more frequently, trying to build a solid foundation, away from the corporate pressures that had initially complicated everything. However, the world around them didn't stay quiet for long. One afternoon, while Emily was working on her new project at Donovan & Greer, Mike called her in for a meeting. He seemed more relaxed, but there was something in his expression that left her suspicious. "Emily, we have an opportunity that might interest you," he said, sitting across from her in his office. "The company is about to close a new contract with a European firm, Galileo Technologies. They want someone with your experience to lead the negotiations." The name of the company made Emily raise her eyebrows. She knew Galileo Technologies was a major player in the European market, and closing this contract could be a huge boost for Donovan and Greer. But she also knew that leading these negotiations would mean being back in the spotlight, and inevitably, being under the scrutiny of those who still doubted her loyalty. "I appreciate the trust," Mike, Emily said carefully. "But do you think this is the right move, considering everything that's happened?" Mike shrugged. "Honestly, yes. You've already proven your loyalty, Emily. The internal investigation made it clear that you didn't leak any information. And, to be direct, you deserve a chance to show what you're capable of. If you're willing, of course. Emily felt a mix of relief and hesitation. Accepting this proposal would be a way to get back in the game, to regain her prominent position in the company. But at the same time, it meant stepping back onto the battlefield and perhaps, once again, crossing paths with Henry in a delicate situation. "I'll need some time to think about it," she finally said, trying to absorb everything the proposal meant. Mike nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "Of course, take as much time as you need, but know that we trust you." In the days that followed, Donovan and Greer's proposal lingered in Emily's mind, like an invisible weight. She wanted to accept. She knew she needed to prove herself and others that she was back, that she could handle any challenge. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the impact this could have on her relationship with Henry. At a dinner, she decided to talk about the issue with him. They were at a cozy restaurant in the East Village, a place they had started frequenting to escape the hustle and bustle of Manhattan. "I was asked to lead new negotiations at Donovan and Greer," she said casually, while stirring her food. "An important contract with a European firm." Henry looked at her, interested, but with a caution she immediately recognized. "That's great, Emily," he said, but there was hesitation in his voice. "But that means you'll be dealing with big contracts again, right?" She nodded. "Yes, I know it's not ideal, considering everything that happened. But I feel like I need this, Henry. I need to prove myself again." Henry watched her for a moment before responding. "I understand. You're great at what you do, and I support that. I just want you to know that I'll be by your side, no matter what happens. I don't want what happened before to happen again." Emily felt a wave of relief. Henry's reaction was exactly what she needed to hear. He was supporting her, even knowing that, once again, they would be on opposite sides of the corporate world. "Thank you," she said with a genuine smile. "That means a lot to me." They continued their dinner, but the future was beginning to unfold with more complexity than before. Both knew that, no matter how much they wanted to build something solid between them, the business world would always cast a shadow over the relationship. In the weeks that followed, Emily immersed herself in preparation for the negotiations with Galileo Technologies. The pressure was enormous, but she was determined to do her best. This time, she wouldn't let anything personal feelings or old suspicions interfere with her work. But, as expected, the corporate world rarely followed the planned path. Just before her trip to Europe, Emily received unexpected news. Collins Enterprises was also interested in securing a contract with Galileo Technologies. Once again, she and Henry would be competing directly for a multi-million-dollar deal. When she found out, Emily felt torn. Her relationship with Henry had grown stronger in recent months, but she knew this new confrontation could bring back old doubts and tensions. That night, she called Henry. "Did you know your company is going after the same contract as Donovan and Greer?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Henry sighed on the other end of the line. "Yes, I knew. I didn't want you to find out this way, but I knew this day would come. We're both in the same market, Emily. It was inevitable that this would happen." She remained silent for a few seconds, processing the information. "And now?" she asked finally. "What do we do about it?" "We do what we've always done," he said calmly. "We compete. You have your job, and I have mine. This doesn't change who we are outside the office." Emily wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that they could keep the two lives separate. But deep down, she knew this would be more difficult than he was suggesting. "I just don't want this to affect what we have," she said softly. "It won't," Henry assured. "I promise." The trip to Europe took place the following week. Emily was focused on every detail of the negotiations with Galileo Technologies, but she couldn't stop thinking about Henry. She knew he would also be there, representing Collins Enterprises, and that only increased the pressure on her. When they finally met in a business meeting, the tension was palpable. Henry sat across the negotiating table, wearing the same serious and professional expression he usually wore during important moments. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and she knew that, despite everything they had discussed, this was a decisive moment. The meeting began, and each presented their proposals impeccably. Emily did her best not to let her emotions interfere. It was as if she and Henry were living two parallel lives. One in the business world, where they were fierce rivals, and another outside of it, where they were trying to maintain a fragile relationship. When the meeting ended, Emily left the room feeling exhausted, but relieved to have done her best. However, before she could walk away, Henry caught up with her in the hallway. "Emily," he said, his voice low, but filled with intensity. "We need to talk." She stopped, turning to him. "About what?" Henry took a step forward, moving closer to her. "About what all of this really means for us." She looked at him for a few seconds, unsure of what to say. What did it mean to compete directly with someone you loved? How could they maintain this separation between work and personal life when the two worlds were so intertwined? And deep down, Emily knew that the answer to these questions could define their future. Emily faced Henry in the hallway, feeling the weight of his words. The tension between them, which had been simmering since the beginning of the trip, now threatened to erupt. They had been trying to maintain the facade that they could separate their personal lives from business, but both knew that this competition was putting everything they had built to the test. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, crossing her arms, unsure of how to react. Henry glanced around, making sure they were alone. The hallway was empty, but he knew this wasn't the place for such an important conversation. "Not here. Can we talk later in private?" he suggested, his tone softer. Emily nodded, though her mind was filled with questions. She knew that outside the meeting room, they would have to face the truth about how the business world was affecting their relationship. But she didn't want to think about that now, not when so much was at stake. "I have another meeting soon," she said, checking her watch. "But we can talk tonight." Henry agreed with a slight nod, appearing relieved. He knew they needed this conversation, but respected Emily's focus on the negotiations. "I'll see you later then," he said, slowly stepping away. As he walked off, Emily felt the weight of her decision. She knew Henry was right, there was something important they needed to discuss, but the contract with Galileo Technologies demanded all her attention at that moment. The rest of the day was filled with meetings and presentations. Emily kept her head in the game, focusing on the details and ensuring her proposal was flawless. Even under pressure, she managed to maintain professionalism, setting her emotions aside at least temporarily. When the last meeting of the day ended, she returned to the hotel, exhausted. But she knew there was still one final meeting ahead, the conversation with Henry. Later that night, Emily went up to the hotel's rooftop where they had agreed to meet. The air was cool, and the view of the European city lit up at night brought a sense of tranquility, though her mind was far from peaceful. Henry was already there, standing by the railing, looking out over the city below. He seemed calm, but there was a tension in his shoulders, something that indicated he was also processing the complexity of the situation. "You're early," she said, trying to sound casual as she approached. "I needed some time to think," he replied without taking his eyes off the view. "I think this trip has been harder than I expected." Emily leaned against the railing next to him, keeping a small but significant distance. "It has been for me too," she admitted. "We're in the middle of something that could affect our careers and what we have outside of here." Henry finally turned to look at her, the seriousness in his eyes making it clear how much he was taking this conversation to heart. "Emily, I need to be honest. This competition, being on opposite sides again, has been complicated for me. I know we talked about keeping things separate, but honestly, I'm struggling to do that." She felt her chest tighten. This was exactly what she had feared. They had tried to keep their personal lives intact, but the reality was that business always found a way to interfere. "I'm struggling too, Henry. It's not easy knowing we're competing, especially with so much at stake," she said, her voice low but firm. "And the worst part is, despite all this conflict, I still feel like I want to try again with you. I want this to work, Emily, but I don't know how to handle that while also keeping the competition going." Henry's confession touched her deeply. She knew how hard it was for him to be vulnerable, especially in a situation where control was essential. "I want it to work too," she whispered. "But maybe we need to accept that we can't control everything, and that sometimes the business world is going to interfere, whether we like it or not." Henry nodded slowly, reflecting on her words. "Maybe," he said thoughtfully, "maybe what we need is to find a way to balance both. Not let the business define who we are outside of work." Emily smiled softly, agreeing with him. "That's a good start." The two stood in silence for a few minutes, watching the city lights below. It was as if the world around them had paused, allowing them, for a few moments, to focus solely on what they felt. "Do you think we can really make this work?" Henry asked, breaking the silence with a rare honesty in his voice. Emily looked him directly in the eyes, sensing that this was the moment to decide. "I think we can try," she replied, her voice filled with determination. "But it's going to take effort from both of us." Henry smiled, a smile that wasn't one of victory or absolute confidence, but of hope. "I'm willing to try." With that, Emily felt something inside her calm down. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but she also knew that, for the first time in a long time, they were on the same page, ready to face the challenges together. In the days that followed, negotiations with Galileo Technologies continued, and the tension between Donovan and Greer and Collins Enterprise remained, but in a more professional manner. Emily and Henry managed to keep the promise they made on the rooftop. They competed fairly, without letting personal emotions interfere with their work. When the final decision from Galileo Technologies was announced, Emily knew the negotiations had been tough for both sides. In the end, Donovan and Greer secured the contract, but unlike before, she didn't feel the thrill of victory the way she used to. Henry, who was present at the announcement, came over to her right after the final meeting. "Congratulations," he said with a calm smile. "You guys deserved it." Emily returned the smile, grateful that he had maintained his composure, even in defeat. "Thank you," she replied. "But honestly, I'm not thinking of it as a victory over you." Henry nodded, and in that moment, something solidified between them. They were on opposite sides in the business world, but that didn't have to define what they had outside of it. That night, after a low-key celebration with her team, Emily returned to the hotel. As she entered her room, she felt her phone buzz with a message from Henry. "How about a new celebration? No contracts or competitions. Just us." Emily smiled as she read the message. Maybe, finally, they were ready to start something new. Something that wasn't defined by the world around them, but only by what they felt. She replied with a simple yes. With the negotiations over, Emily returned to New York with a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. Securing the contract with Galileo Technologies was a big win for Donovan and Greer. But more than that, the real relief came from the certainty that, this time, she had managed to keep her relationship with Henry intact, even while competing directly against him. The weeks that followed were peaceful. Emily and Henry saw each other several times, trying to keep things simple. Dinner dates, walks through the city parks, and nights spent just talking about life, away from business. Slowly, both began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make the relationship work without the business world interfering. But as always in their lives, the calm didn't last long. One day, while Emily was in the office, she received a call from Mike Donovan. There was an urgency in his voice that made her sit up straight in her chair immediately. "Emily, we need to talk. Can you come to my office?" Mike said, not offering much explanation. Without hesitation, she got up and walked to Mike's office. He was waiting with a serious expression, which was unusual for him. Upon entering, she noticed the concerned faces of the other directors present. "What's going on?" she asked, feeling her stomach tighten. Mike closed the door, asking her to sit. "We received some information this morning that could complicate things," he began gravely. "It seems Collins Enterprises is trying to merge with an Asian company, Day One Industries. This could significantly alter the market and potentially impact the contracts we've recently secured." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Henry hadn't mentioned anything about a merger in their conversations. She knew he was always involved in big negotiations, but a merger with an Asian giant was something that could shake the entire market. "How does this affect us directly?" Emily asked, trying to stay focused. "If the merger goes through, Collins Enterprises will have much more capital and influence in the international market. That means they'll have the power to nullify or renegotiate contracts they consider less favorable, including our deal with Galileo Technologies," Mike explained, his expression stern. Emily carefully processed the information. It was clear that the merger could shift the entire balance of power in the industry. And worse yet, once again, she found herself caught between her personal and professional life. "Do you have any contact with Collins that might give us an advantage on what's happening?" asked one of the directors, clearly aware of her relationship with Henry. Emily looked at him with a mix of surprise and anger. She knew that, eventually, this issue would come up again. But now, the situation felt even more delicate. "I'm not going to use my relationship to get information," she said firmly, crossing her arms. "If Collins is making a move, We'll have to deal with it professionally, as we always have. Mike nodded, respecting her stance, but the atmosphere in the office remained tense. I understand, Emily, and I agree that we should keep things separate, but we need to be prepared for the impact this could have, he said more calmly. She knew Mike was right. Even without wanting to use her personal connections, the reality was that she and Henry were, once again, on opposite sides of a conflict that could define the future of both companies. And this time, the stakes seemed higher than ever. That night, Emily met Henry for a dinner that had already been planned. While he excitedly talked about a recent business trip, she could barely focus. The thought of the merger and its impact on their lives wouldn't leave her mind. Finally, when she couldn't hold it in any longer, she decided to be direct. Henry, I heard about the merger with Day One Industries. Is it true? She asked, interrupting him mid-story. Henry looked visibly surprised, his face softening a bit. Yes, we're in advanced talks, he admitted after a brief silence. I didn't want to involve you in this because I knew it would be a problem for you. Emily bit her lip, trying to organize her thoughts. The revelation, though expected, still caught her off guard. She knew Henry was always involved in big deals, but a merger of this magnitude would directly affect not only the companies but everything they were trying to build. Do you understand what this means, right? She asked, unable to hide her concern. If this merger happens, it could impact my job. And not just that, it could affect our relationship. Henry sighed, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that showed how much he was also worried about the situation. I know, but I have no control over this. This merger is something my board and shareholders have wanted for a long time. And yes, it's going to cause waves in the market, but I don't want it to interfere with what we're trying to build together. It won't be that simple, Emily countered, her voice serious. Donovan and Greer is already preparing for the impact. If Collins secures this merger, they could nullify contracts, change the game entirely. You're asking me to just ignore all of that? Henry looked at her sincerely, but there was also a touch of frustration in his gaze. I'm not asking you to ignore it, Emily. I'm asking us not to let it destroy what we're trying to build. I understand the consequences, but there's something more important here. Us. She was silent for a moment, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. Once again, they were at the crossroads between business and feelings. And, like before, they knew it would be nearly impossible to completely separate the two worlds. I don't know if we can do this time, Henry, she finally said, her tone filled with exhaustion. I wanted to work, but we're always back in the same place. There's always something in business that puts us against each other. Henry looked hurt, but he didn't contradict her. I know, it's hard for me too. But if we give up now, what will we have? He asked, his voice full of restrained emotions. Emily took a deep breath, feeling her heart torn. She wanted it to work, wanted to believe they could overcome this. But she knew the weight of the circumstances might be too much. Maybe we need some time. Henry, she said, her voice weak but resolute. I need some time to think. This is all too much for me right now. Henry looked at her in silence, his face reflecting a mix of understanding and pain. If that's what you need, I respect it. But know that I'll be here, waiting for you. She didn't respond. She simply nodded, standing up slowly from the table and saying goodbye with a quick wave. She knew what she was doing was necessary, but that didn't make the decision any less painful. As she walked through the streets of New York, with the city lights flickering around her, Emily felt like she was once again on the brink of a decision that could change her life forever. And this time, she wasn't sure if there would be an easy way back. The days following that night brought Emily a sense of emptiness. The time she had asked for from Henry wasn't just a break in the relationship, but an opportunity for her to step back and try to see everything more clearly. From the beginning, their relationship had been surrounded by complications, and now it seemed that, for the first time, she was stopping to really reflect on the future. During this time, Emily threw herself into work. She wanted to focus on something she could control, and her career seemed like the perfect refuge to avoid the avalanche of emotions that hit her every time she thought of Henry. Donovan and Greer was busier than ever, with the imminent merger between Collins Enterprises and Day One Industries occupying everyone's mind in the industry. If the merger happened, the market would change drastically, and Emily knew her company's position would be at risk. Galileo Technologies, for example, one of the most valuable contracts Emily had secured, might reconsider the partnership if Collins grew even stronger. This made her anxious, and despite not wanting to, she found herself thinking about Henry at almost every moment. Work was a constant reminder that no matter how hard they tried to separate the personal from the professional, they were both inextricably linked to a world that didn't forgive weakness. That afternoon, while reviewing reports in her office, Emily was called to a last-minute meeting with Mike Donovan. Her boss was more serious than usual, which immediately put her on alert. "Emily, sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair in front of him. She obeyed, trying to stay calm. "We've received information that complicates our situation," Mike began, without any preamble. "The merger between Collins Enterprises and Day One Industries is almost guaranteed. This means they'll have access to bargaining power that could directly impact our most recent contracts, including the one with Galileo Technologies." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the news. The possibility of losing that contract was a nightmare. "Do you think they'll try to renegotiate?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "It's very likely. Collins will want to use its new market position to secure the best possible terms," Mike said, shaking his head in disappointment. "We need to be ready to respond." Emily straightened in her chair, determined to face the challenge. "What are we going to do?" Mike sighed, looking at her with a mix of concern and confidence. "We need to use our connections. We need to make sure that when this merger is announced, Galileo still sees value in continuing to work with us." She knew what that meant. It was yet another delicate and complex move, and she would have to be at the center of it. In a way, Emily had always known that, eventually, this kind of pressure would arise, but now, with Henry involved, everything felt even more complicated. "I understand," she said, her voice firm. "I'll do what's necessary." Mike nodded, relieved by her response. "I knew I could count on you." That night, as Emily walked home, her phone rang. She looked at the screen, seeing Henry's name flash. Her heart raced, but she hesitated before answering. After a few seconds, she finally decided to pick up. "Henry," she said, trying to control her voice. "Hey, Emily. I've been thinking about you," he replied, his voice soft but filled with a tension she knew well. "I know you asked for some time, and I'm respecting that, but I thought you'd like to know that the merger with Day One was finalized today." Emily felt her stomach drop. She knew this moment would come, but hearing it directly from Henry made her realize just how real the situation was. "I figured it was close," she replied, trying to hide her anxiety. "I know this might complicate things for you at work." "It wasn't what I wanted, Emily," Henry said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I know this seems like another barrier between us, but it wasn't something I had a choice in." She knew Henry was being honest. Even though he was the CEO of Collins Enterprises, the pressures of the market and the shareholders dictated many of the moves he made. "I know, Henry, but that doesn't change the fact that we're, once again, on opposite sides of a battle that could cost us both a lot." Henry sighed, and she could imagine the frustration written on his face. "I hate that this keeps happening. I didn't want work to keep coming between us. But the truth is, I'm as stuck in this as you are." Emily was silent for a few seconds, thinking about everything that had happened between them. It wasn't fair to put all the blame on work, but it was undeniable that the circumstances had never been favorable for their relationship. "I need more time, Henry," she said, her voice softer now. "I need to figure out how to deal with all of this." "I know, and I'll be here waiting, like I always said I would," he replied, resigned. After saying their goodbyes, Emily hung up and stood still for a moment, looking at the city lights. It was hard to know what to do. On the one hand, she wanted to keep trying with Henry, but on the other, she knew that the business world, with all its twists and turns, wouldn't allow for an easy coexistence between the two. In the days that followed, news of the merger between Collins Enterprises and Day One Industries shook the market. Analysts predicted that the new partnership would create a tech giant with enough influence to dictate the direction of several smaller companies, including Donovan and Greer. The contract with Galileo Technologies became a critical point of concern for everyone at the company. Emily, amid the work pressure, continued to grapple with her feelings for Henry. They still kept in touch, but the emotional distance she had asked for was beginning to take its toll. She missed him, but at the same time, She was struggling to maintain her independence in a situation that seemed increasingly out of her control. One morning, while getting ready for another meeting, she received a message from Henry. "Can I see you tonight? We need to talk." Emily took a deep breath. She knew this conversation was inevitable, but she still didn't feel ready. Even so, she couldn't avoid the confrontation. "Let's meet at 7 p.m. at the usual restaurant." She sent the message, trying to brace herself for whatever was to come. At 7 p.m., Emily arrived at the restaurant and found Henry already waiting, as always. He looked tired, but there was a determination in his eyes that made her realize he was ready to face whatever was troubling them. "Thanks for coming," he said, standing up and motioning for her to sit. Emily sat down, feeling a mix of nervousness and curiosity. "What did you want to talk about, Henry?" He sighed, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of exhaustion. "I don't want work to keep getting in the way of what we have. I know that's been the biggest obstacle between us, but I can't keep waiting for things to fix themselves. I need to know if you still want to try." Emily remained silent, feeling the weight of the question. She knew the decision wasn't easy, but she also knew she couldn't keep Henry waiting indefinitely. "I want to try, Henry, but the problem isn't what I feel. It's everything happening around us. I don't know if we're ready to handle all of this right now," she said honestly. "We're always waiting for the right moment, but maybe it'll never come," he replied, his tone firmer. "What I'm trying to say is that I'm willing to make it work, even with all the difficulties. But I need you to be in this too." Emily looked at him, seeing how hard he was fighting to keep what they had. She knew he was right. Waiting for the perfect moment would never work. Maybe they needed to accept the imperfections and work with them instead of against them. "I'm willing to try, Henry, but we need to be realistic. We know that work will continue to be an obstacle, and we need to be ready to deal with it more maturely." He smiled, clearly relieved by her response. "We can make this work, Emily. We just need to be together in this." Emily nodded, feeling that for the first time, both were ready to face the challenges in a more honest and conscious way. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she felt there was a real hope that they could build something solid, even amid the storms of the corporate world. As the two talked, the world around them continued to spin with its conflicts and challenges, but at least in that moment, both knew they were ready to fight together. In the days following that conversation, Emily and Henry began to rebuild their relationship with newfound clarity. They knew it wouldn't be easy, that work would continue to cast a shadow between them, but they decided they would truly try. Now, there was a stronger commitment, a promise that, regardless of the obstacles, they would face the difficulties together. However, as their personal relationship progressed, the corporate world showed no mercy. The merger between Collins Enterprises and Day One Industries was officially completed, and the market felt the first effects of this new giant. Smaller companies and large-scale contracts, like Donovan and Greer's with Galileo Technologies, were under threat. The pressure on Emily increased with each passing day. One afternoon, during a tense meeting at Donovan and Greer, Mike Donovan entered the room with a worried expression. He was accompanied by several board members, which was never a good sign. "Everyone, we just received news that will require immediate action," Mike said, his face grim. "Collins Enterprises has sent a revised proposal to Galileo Technologies, offering more aggressive terms than ours." Emily felt her heart race. She knew Collins might try to renegotiate, but she hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. Once again, the impact of her two lives colliding was about to hit a critical point. "What do you mean, revised?" one of the directors asked, visibly worried. "Are we talking about a breach of contract?" Mike shook his head. "Not exactly. Galileo hasn't made any decisions yet, but they've made it clear that if we don't adjust our offer, they might consider this new proposal." Emily clenched her fists under the table, feeling the tension take over her body. She knew this move came from Henry, and that left her torn. On one hand, she understood he was just doing his job, but on the other, it put everything she and her company had built at risk. "And what are we going to do?" Emily asked, trying to stay calm. Mike sighed and looked directly at her. "We need you to lead a new round of negotiations with Galileo. They already trust you, and that could give us an edge. But to be honest, it's going to be tough to compete with Collins now that they have Day One backing them." Emily knew this would be a delicate mission. Going back to the negotiating table with Galileo would, At best, be a risky move, and at worst, a losing battle. Still, there was no other choice. "I'll do what I can," she replied, determined but aware of the challenges ahead. In the following days, Emily dove into a marathon of meetings with the internal team and Galileo Technologies executives. Every word, every detail of the revised proposal had to be carefully analyzed to ensure Donovan and Greer could remain competitive. At the same time, the weight of knowing she was, once again, directly competing with Henry was hard to bear. They continued seeing each other during this period, but it was impossible to ignore the fact that they were, once again, on opposite sides of a corporate battle. There was a tension in the air every time they met, even as they tried to keep things light and relaxed. Both knew the future of their companies depended on how this negotiation turned out. On one particularly tough evening, Emily and Henry decided to meet at a discreet bar in the Lower East Side. It was a place where they could escape the pressure and expectations, at least for a few hours. "You look exhausted," Henry said as they sat at a table in the corner. He looked at her with genuine concern, something that touched Emily in a special way. "And I am," she replied bluntly. "These negotiations with Galileo are killing me. I knew it would be tough, but I didn't expect it to be this complicated." Henry nodded, but the serious look on his face showed that he, too, was feeling the weight of the situation. "I didn't want us to get to this point. I didn't want work to keep putting us against each other," he said in a low voice, so no one around could hear. Emily looked at him, feeling the same internal conflict that was tormenting her as well. "I know, but this is what we do, isn't it? We're on different sides of the market. There's no avoiding it." "But what if there was?" Henry asked suddenly, catching her by surprise. "What do you mean? What if there was a way for us to be together without work interfering?" Henry paused, looking at her intensely. "I've been thinking about this lately. I don't know how yet, but we can't keep going like this, Emily. Always on the edge between what we feel and what we do. It's going to destroy us eventually." Emily remained silent, processing his words. She had never imagined that Henry was thinking about more drastic solutions. The idea of changing everything, of finding a way out of the situation seemed surreal, but she knew he was right. Continuing the same cycle of competition and tension would eventually ruin any chance they had of something lasting. "Are you suggesting that one of us leaves the business world?" she asked, with a mixture of incredulity and curiosity. Henry shrugged, not giving a direct answer. "Maybe. Or maybe there's another way. I just know I can't keep competing with you and at the same time trying to love you." Henry's words hit her like a blow. As much as she knew professional competition would always be there, hearing it so bluntly and honestly made her realize that, indeed, something would have to change if they wanted to stay together. "I don't know, Henry. I love my work, and you love yours too. How can we walk away from that?" she asked, trying to understand how they could reconcile two such different passions, work and love. Henry took her hand across the table, something he rarely did in public. "I'm not saying we have to give up everything, but we need to find balance. Something that allows us to live what we feel without work destroying it. We need time to think, to find a solution that works for both of us." Emily looked at his hand over hers, and, for the first time in a long while, felt that there might be a real chance of making this work. But she knew the answer wouldn't come easily. There would be tough decisions ahead, and deep down, she feared what she might have to sacrifice to keep what they had. "Let's try to find that balance, Henry," she finally said, gently squeezing his hand. "But we have to be honest about what we're willing to lose." He nodded, knowing that as hard as it was, they were on the right path by recognizing that something needed to change. In the days that followed that conversation, Emily continued negotiations with Galileo Technologies, but now with a new perspective. She knew that, regardless of the outcome, her life was about to change. And for the first time, she was willing to consider paths she had never imagined before. Her conversations with Henry became more frequent, and little by little, they began discussing concrete possibilities of how to balance their personal and professional lives. Plans were being made, ideas shared, all with the goal of keeping what they had built together. Finally, the day of Galileo's decision arrived. Emily, Mike, and the Donovan and Greer team were gathered, waiting for the official announcement. When the call came, everyone in the room fell silent, focused on the decision that could define the company's future. The Galileo representative spoke in a professional but clear tone. After much consideration, we have decided to maintain our current contract with Donovan and Greer. Your proposal was convincing and continues to meet the value we expected. We appreciate the ongoing partnership and look forward to working with you in the years to come. The room erupted in applause and sighs of relief. Emily felt a wave of victory wash over her. But she knew this didn't change the fact that the biggest battle was yet to come, the battle to keep her relationship with Henry intact amid all these pressures. That night, she met Henry and, with a smile on her face, gave him the news. We kept the contract. Henry smiled back, clearly happy for her. I knew you'd pull it off. And at that moment, Emily realized that even though the business world was relentless, what they had could withstand any storm as long as they kept fighting together. After securing the contract with Galileo Technologies, Emily felt relieved. Not only had she proven her professional worth, but she had also managed, for the first time, to maintain the balance between her work and her relationship with Henry. However, both knew that this was only a temporary victory. The business world never stopped, and the next challenge was always lurking. The days following Galileo's decision were calmer, but the sense that something bigger was coming lingered over them. Emily and Henry continued to discuss how they could balance their personal lives with the pressures of work. And although they had decided they didn't want to lose what they had, they knew that new difficult decisions would soon arise. One day, while Emily was reviewing reports at Donovan and Greer, she received an unexpected call from Megan, her best friend, who always seemed to know when something was about to happen. "Emily, you've been so busy we hardly talk anymore," Megan exclaimed on the phone, her voice light, but always full of energy. "I want to know everything. How are things with Henry?" Emily smiled. It was good to hear Megan's voice and talk to someone who wasn't directly tied to the chaos of the corporate world. "We're trying, Megan. Things have been complicated, as always, but we're taking it one day at a time," she replied, relaxing a bit in her chair. Megan laughed on the other end. "Complicated is an understatement for what you two have been through. But honestly, I'm glad you're still together. After everything, you both deserve some peace." Emily knew Megan was right. Her relationship with Henry had gone through many ups and downs, but now, more than ever, she was determined to make things work. Still, that peace always seemed just out of reach, never quite within grasp. "I need a break to reconnect with myself, and, of course, with you too. Should we meet this weekend?" Emily suggested, feeling like she needed the lightness of her friend to clear her mind. "Deal. Let's do brunch and talk about everything you're trying to hide from me," Megan joked, making Emily laugh for the first time in days. After hanging up, Emily felt a little lighter. It was easy to forget the importance of having friends like Megan in the midst of business madness, and she knew she needed to balance all areas of her life, not just work and her relationship. Later that night, Henry invited Emily for dinner at his apartment. He seemed calmer than usual, and Emily noticed that he was trying to keep things light between them, something she appreciated. The dinner was peaceful, but something in Henry's behavior suggested that there was more to be discussed. As he placed the wine glasses on the table, Emily couldn't help but notice the tension in the air, something Henry was trying to hide. "Is everything okay?" she asked, watching him closely. Henry sighed and sat down across from her, running his hand through his hair in a nervous gesture, as he often did when thinking about something serious. "I wanted to talk about something that's about to happen," he said finally, looking at her sincerely. "The merger with Day One is officially consolidated, but now the Collins board wants to expand even further. We're considering opening new markets in Europe and Asia, and that would mean a lot of changes for me." Emily felt her stomach churn. She knew Henry's job required constant travel and decisions, but an expansion this large could complicate their relationship even more. "And how does this affect us?" she asked, her voice careful. Henry hesitated for a moment before answering. "I don't know exactly yet. The discussions are advancing, and the board wants me to take a more direct role in these new operations, which could mean long periods away from the country. And I'm trying to figure out how this would affect what we have." Emily remained silent for a moment, processing the news. As much as they tried to maintain balance, the reality was that both of their jobs required constant sacrifices. She knew that if Henry accepted this new position, it would mean less time together, more pressure, and perhaps even more competition between them in new markets. "Do you want to take this position?" she finally asked, trying to gauge what Henry really felt about the proposal. He looked at her with a mix of doubt and frustration. "Part of me does. It's a big opportunity, something my father always dreamed of for Collins. But I also know what it would mean for us. I don't want to lose you, Emily, and I don't want work to keep interfering with what we have." Emily took a deep breath. She knew this was a tough decision for Henry, but she also knew he had ambitions he couldn't ignore. Still, the possibility that their jobs would continue to be a constant obstacle weighed heavily on her. "I understand, Henry, and I'll support whatever decision you make," she said sincerely. "But we need to be honest about the impact this will have. We need to find a way to make it work. Even with the travel, the absences, it won't be easy." Henry nodded, clearly relieved by her response, but also aware that things were still uncertain. "We'll figure this out together," he said, gently squeezing her hand across the table. Emily smiled, but she knew the real test was yet to come. If Henry took the new position, they would both have to face more challenges, both in work and in their relationship. And this time, they would have to be stronger than ever to handle the pressures surrounding them. The next morning, Emily woke up with her mind still full of thoughts about the conversation from the night before. As she walked through the bustling streets of Manhattan on her way to work, she felt a mixture of apprehension and determination. She loved her job, and she knew Henry loved his, but more and more, she realized that both would need to find ways to reconcile these two passions without destroying what they had built. At the Donovan and Greer office, the atmosphere was as tense as usual. The impact of the Collins Day One merger still echoed in the market, and Emily's company needed to stay one step ahead to ensure its survival in such a competitive environment. Mike Donovan called her into a meeting early, and when she entered the room, she saw that he was poring over a series of documents with a concerned expression. "We need to talk about the next few weeks, Emily," he said bluntly. "We've got new competition emerging in the European market, and we need you to lead this. There's no room for errors." Emily nodded, aware of the responsibility being placed on her shoulders. She knew she had to give her best, but now, more than ever, she was worried about how to balance this new pressure with the personal challenges she faced with Henry. "We'll prepare everything to make sure our proposal is the strongest," she replied, her voice firm, but her mind distracted. Mike noticed the slight shift in her attention and, knowing her well, asked, "Is everything okay? You seem distant." Emily hesitated for a moment, but decided to be honest. "Henry's considering a new position at Collins, something that might mean more travel, more time away, and that's complicating things for us." Mike shook his head, understanding. "I imagine that's tough, but know that you have the company's support. And if you need some time to process all of this, just let me know." Emily thanked him, knowing Mike was being understanding, but also knowing there was no time to lose. The competition in the market wouldn't wait for her to resolve her personal issues. As she left the room, she felt the weight of expectations on her both at work and in her relationship. She knew the next few months would be challenging, but she also knew that, one way or another, she would have to find a way to make it all work. The days that followed the conversation with Henry brought more anxiety than answers for Emily. The possibility of Henry accepting the new role at Collins and traveling frequently to lead the company's international expansion weighed heavily on her. More and more, she felt that they were being forced to make impossible choices, both in love and in their careers. She knew they both loved what they did, but how could they keep their relationship going in the face of so many obstacles? At Donovan and Greer, the pressure was relentless. The new competition in the European market demanded everyone's maximum effort, and Emily was at the center of this battle. Even with her thoughts drifting to Henry, she knew she couldn't afford to fail. Her role in the company was crucial, and with the Collins Day One merger now solidified, the competition only intensified. One Wednesday afternoon, while Emily was working on an important presentation for the board, her phone rang. It was a call from Henry, and just seeing his name flash on the screen brought a mix of emotions. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Henry?" she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Hi, Emily. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation," he began, his tone serious but calm. "I need to make a decision about the new position at Collins, and I want to talk to you before I do." Emily knew this moment would come, but she wasn't ready to face it so soon. The pressures of work were already draining her energy, and now, this conversation would be the turning point for their future. "Sure, can we meet tonight?" she asked, knowing this would be a delicate conversation that would require time and attention. "Yes, I'll meet you at our usual place at 8, he replied. After hanging up, Emily felt the weight of the situation grow. She knew that whatever Henry was about to decide would change everything between them, and his answer would bring challenges that could either strengthen or destroy their relationship. At 8 that night, Emily arrived at the small restaurant in the East Village, the place that had become their refuge for important conversations. Henry was already waiting for her, and when she saw him, she realized that he looked tired, as if the past few weeks had drained his energy just as much as hers. Sitting down at the table, the two exchanged shy smiles, but the weight of what was to come was palpable. "So, have you made a decision?" Emily asked, feeling her stomach twist. Henry took a deep breath, crossing his arms on the table. "Not completely, but I'm almost there." He paused, as if carefully choosing his words. "The new position is a big step for Collins. My father always dreamed of this international expansion, and now, with the merger, we have the resources to make it happen. But I know what it's going to mean for us." Emily waited for him to continue, not sure what to say. "They want me to spend a good part of the year away, traveling between Europe and Asia. That means months away from New York and away from you." Henry looked directly into her eyes, with a sincerity that touched her deeply. "I want this job, Emily, but I don't want to lose you in the process." Emily's heart tightened at his words. She knew how much Henry wanted this position, how much it meant to him, but she also knew what it would cost them both. They were finally building something solid, and now this distance could ruin everything. "I understand, Henry. I know how important this is to you, and I know it would be a sacrifice for both of us," she said, trying to keep the calm in her voice. "But how can we make it work if you're on the other side of the world?" Henry shook his head, clearly frustrated with the situation. "I don't know. That's what's killing me. I want to make both things work, but I don't know if it's possible. And I don't want to ask you to wait for something that might end up hurting us even more." The silence that followed was heavy. Both knew there wasn't an easy answer, but they also knew a decision had to be made soon. "What if you took the position and we tried to keep the relationship long distance for a while?" Emily suggested, even though she knew how hard it would be. "We can see how things go without making any final decisions right now." Henry looked at her with surprise, but also with a hint of doubt. "Do you think we could make that work? Long distance, constant travel." He paused, seeming to consider the idea. "I don't want to put you in that situation, Emily. I don't want to see you unhappy because of something I decided." Emily knew the idea was risky. Their relationship had already gone through so many trials, and the thought of keeping it long distance only seemed to add more difficulties. "Maybe it's the only option we have right now," she replied honestly. "If you don't take this position, you'll end up regretting it. And if we don't try to keep what we have, we'll regret that too." Henry nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in her words. "So, you think we should try?" he asked, with a slight, melancholic smile. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision, but also knowing she couldn't stop Henry from following his dreams. "Yes, let's try. Let's see how things go. And if it doesn't work, at least we'll know we tried." Henry looked at her with a mix of relief and sadness. Both knew the road ahead would be full of uncertainties, but they were willing to take the risk. "I knew you'd be strong enough to suggest this." He smiled, taking her hand across the table. "I love you, Emily, and I'll do everything I can to make this work, no matter the distance." Emily smiled back, though her heart felt heavy. She knew the distance would bring new challenges, but she also knew they both needed to go through this phase to find out if they were truly ready for the future together. "I love you too, Henry. Let's make this work, one day at a time." They spent the rest of the night discussing details of how they would make the long-distance relationship work, Henry's travel plans, and how they would keep constant communication. There was a mix of hope and apprehension in the air, but at least now, both were committed to trying. The next morning, Emily returned to the Donovan and Greer office with a renewed determination. She knew the personal challenges would still be there, but she also knew she couldn't let that affect her performance at work. The new competition in the European market demanded her full attention, and she was ready to lead the team with total focus. Mike called her into a strategy meeting early, and when she entered the room, she noticed the team was more motivated than ever. They knew the next few weeks would be crucial, and everyone was prepared to give their best. "Emily, we need your leadership now more than ever," Mike said, looking at her with confidence. "The competition is getting tougher, and we need to make sure our proposal is flawless." Emily nodded, ready for the challenge. "Let's do this," she replied firmly. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of intense work. Emily led the team with precision, ensuring every detail of the proposal was fine-tuned and reviewed. At the same time, she kept in constant contact with Henry, who was now preparing to take on his new role at Collins. Their conversations were a mix of hope and planning, but also of a quiet sadness for what they knew they would face. When the day came to present the final proposal to the European board, Emily felt exhausted but confident. She and her team had given their best, and now it was just a matter of waiting for the result. However, in the back of her mind, she knew the biggest challenge was yet to come, keeping what she had with Henry despite the growing distance. The weeks following Henry's decision to take on the new role at Collins Enterprises were a mix of expectations and challenges for Emily. At first, the intense pace of work at Donovan and Greer helped keep her mind occupied. Henry's travels to Europe and Asia hadn't fully started yet, and they were able to maintain regular contact, with occasional meetups and dinners whenever he was in New York. But over time, things began to change. Henry's trips became more frequent and longer. The time they spent together drastically decreased, and their conversations, which had once been light and relaxed, became punctuated by silences and a subtle tension. Though they tried hard to keep the relationship alive, the distance was beginning to take its toll. Emily, on the other hand, was busier than ever. Donovan and Greer's European proposal was moving forward, and with that came more meetings, travel, and growing pressure. She knew she couldn't afford to fail, especially now that her company needed to stand out in an increasingly competitive market. Still, even with work filling her hours, there were moments when Henry's absence hit her hard. One day, during an especially stressful afternoon at the office, Emily received a message from Henry. "Can I call you later? We need to talk about something important." The tone of the message left her feeling uneasy. Since Henry had started traveling more frequently, their important conversations were often delayed or dealt with superficially. Now, it seemed he was trying to address something more serious. At 7 that evening, as planned, Henry called. Emily was at home, sitting on the couch in the living room, trying to unwind after a long day of work. Hearing his voice, she felt a mix of longing and apprehension. "Hey, Henry," she said, trying to sound natural. "Hey," Emmy responded, with a more serious tone than usual. "How are you?" "Fine. As much as possible," she replied, attempting to keep things light, but sensing that something was about to happen. "And you? How are things over there?" Henry sighed, and the hesitation in his voice was evident. "That's the problem, Emily. Things here are complicated. The trips are getting more intense, and I think it's going to be like this for a long time. The board wants me to spend more time in Europe and Asia. We're opening new offices, and they want me to oversee them closely." Emily felt her stomach sink. She knew the trips would be long, but hearing Henry say that this would be the new normal made her realize how devastating this distance could be for them. "And what does that mean for us?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though the anxiety was growing inside her. Henry was silent for a few seconds before responding. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I don't know how we can keep this up for much longer, Emily. I hate being so far from you, and the more I travel, the harder it gets. We're trying, but I feel like we're drifting apart, and I don't want that." Emily's heart tightened. It was exactly what she feared, but now, hearing Henry verbalize what had been growing between them made her realize the problem was real and escalating. "I feel that too, Henry," she admitted, her voice soft. "We're drifting apart, and I don't know if I can keep this up for much longer. But I also don't want to lose you." "I don't want to lose you either," Henry replied, with a tone of frustration. "But I need to be realistic. This job is important to me, to Collins, and I can't set that aside right now. At the same time, you're tied to New York with your work, and I don't want to ask you to sacrifice your career for me." Henry's honesty caused Emily deep pain. It was true. They were both at crucial points in their careers, and asking one of them to choose between love and work would be unfair. But how could they maintain a relationship when the distance between them was growing wider? "What are you suggesting?" she asked, afraid of the answer. Henry hesitated before responding. "I don't know. Maybe we need a break. Maybe we should stop forcing something that, right now, seems impossible to sustain." Henry's words hit her like a blow. Was this it? Were they really considering giving up? After everything they had been through? A break? She repeated, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. "That doesn't solve anything, Henry. It just delays the inevitable." "I know," he responded, his voice sounding desperate. "But I don't see another way out right now, Emily. Keeping this up is only going to hurt us more. Maybe if we take a break, we can find a solution later, when things calm down." Emily was silent for a long moment. Part of her knew Henry was right. The situation was becoming unsustainable. But the idea of simply taking a break felt like giving up, and she didn't want to give up on him. "This feels like the end, Henry," she said finally. "I don't know if I want that. I don't know if I can do that." Henry took a deep breath, as if struggling to find the right words. "I don't want the end either, Emily. But if we keep fighting against something that's beyond our control, we're going to destroy ourselves. I'd rather take a break now than watch this deteriorate completely." Tears began to stream down Emily's face, but she tried to stay composed. "So that's it? We're just gonna pull away and hope things change?" she asked, her voice cracking. "It's not what I want, him, but right now, I don't know what else we can do. I need to focus on the work here, and you need to continue your career there. We're gonna hurt ourselves if we try to keep this going the way it is now." Emily felt a deep emptiness grow inside her. She knew Henry was right, but accepting it was something else entirely. "Fine, if that's what you think is best," she said finally, her voice trembling. Henry was silent for a moment before softly responding. "It's not what I want, Emily, but maybe it's what we need right now." After saying goodbye, Emily sat on the couch, staring into space. The conversation with Henry seemed to have put an end to something that, despite all the difficulties, she didn't want to lose. Now, the distance that had been physical was turning into an emotional chasm between them. In the days that followed, Emily tried to focus on work, but the pain of the separation was always present. The conversations with Henry became drastically less frequent, and she felt that something between them had broken, even though neither had intended to end things definitively. Mike Donovan called her in for a meeting one morning, and when she entered the room, she saw that he had a serious expression, mixed with a sense of anticipation. "Emily, we need you to lead a new project," he said, sliding a thick file across the table toward her. "We've received an offer from an Asian company that wants to close a big contract with Donovan and Greer. It's going to require a lot of travel, some of it long, and a lot of dedication. I know you've been going through a lot, but I believe this is an important opportunity for you." Emily looked at the file in silence. The trips and time away from the office would help her forget about her situation with Henry for a while, but it would also mean they would be even more distant, even though they had already agreed to take a break. "I'll take it," she said with determination, not hesitating. "I need this right now." Mike nodded, satisfied with her response, unaware of the internal turmoil Emily was facing. In the months that followed, Emily threw herself into the new project. The trips became frequent, and her life was consumed by meetings across different time zones and complex negotiations. The pain of the separation from Henry was still there, but the fast-paced work helped keep her busy enough not to constantly think about what she had lost. Henry, on the other hand, continued his travels through Europe and Asia, overseeing Collins Enterprises' expansion. Their messages dwindled until they became rare. Both of them knew that time and distance had become almost insurmountable barriers. But in a corner of her mind, Emily still held on to the hope that when the work slowed down, when the pressure eased, they might try again. Maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth saving between them. Months had passed since Emily and Henry had decided to take a break. The intense pace of work kept both of them from stopping to reflect on what they really wanted for the future. But despite the growing distance, Emily still carried an emptiness inside her. Work kept her occupied, but the nights were lonely. What had once been a balance between love and career now felt like an internal struggle, where she wasn't sure if she was running away from her feelings or just accepting reality. The new series of trips and negotiations for Donovan and Greer was in full swing, with Emily personally overseeing every detail. Her frequent flights to Asia had become routine, and she spent more time in airports and hotels than in her own home. The team was satisfied with the progress, and Mike praised her performance, but no one knew how disconnected she felt from life outside of work. One afternoon, as she was preparing to board a flight back to New York, her phone rang. It was Megan, her best friend, and the call came at a moment when Emily needed emotional relief the most. You're going to kill me," Megan began, her voice more nervous than excited, which immediately caught Emily's attention. "What happened?" Emily asked, already feeling a chill run up her spine. Megan hesitated for a second before dropping the bombshell. "I saw Henry yesterday, here in New York." Emily's heart raced. "Henry in New York?" He hadn't mentioned anything about coming back to the city. "What? How?" she asked, trying to process the information. "I was at a restaurant with some friends, and there he was having dinner with a woman," Megan said, her voice full of caution. "I didn't want to tell you, but I thought you should know." Emily was silent for a moment, feeling a wave of confusion. Their relationship had cooled, but they hadn't officially ended things. She knew they were both moving forward with their lives as best they could, but hearing that Henry was in New York, especially with another woman, made her question what was really happening. "He was with another woman?" Emily asked, trying to hide the pain in her voice. "Yeah, they seemed to be having a business dinner, or something like that. It didn't look romantic, at least not in the way you'd imagine. But I thought it was strange that he's in the city and didn't tell you." Emily took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She didn't know what to think. She felt like Henry was slowly leaving her behind, even though they hadn't explicitly said so. The fact that he was in New York without mentioning anything felt like more evidence that things were drifting further apart than she wanted to admit. "Thanks for telling me, Megan," she said, her voice tense. "I'll deal with it." After hanging up, Emily felt the weight of the situation settle over her. Henry was in New York and hadn't made the slightest effort to see her or even let her know he was there. Had he already moved on? Was the break they'd agreed upon actually the end disguised as a pause? When she arrived in New York that night, Emily was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. But instead of going home, she decided she needed answers. She picked up the phone and, without thinking too much, called Henry. The phone rang several times before he answered, his voice sounding somewhat surprised to hear from her. "Emily? Hey, how are you?" She hesitated for a second, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'm fine. I heard you're in New York." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Yeah, I came back for a board meeting and some negotiations. Sorry, I should have told you. It all happened so fast," Henry said, trying to sound casual. Emily felt the anger rising. He was in New York, just a few blocks from where she lived, and hadn't bothered to tell her. "Seems like you had time to see other people," she snapped, unable to hold back. Henry was silent for a moment, clearly confused by the accusation. "What are you talking about?" "Megan saw you last night. You were having dinner with a woman," Emily said bluntly. "You didn't even think to let me know you were in the city?" Henry let out a heavy sigh, as if preparing for a conversation he'd been expecting to have at some point. "Emily, that was a business dinner. I was with a client from day one, discussing the next steps of the merger. It wasn't personal. I didn't tell you because, well, I thought we needed space. That's what we agreed on, wasn't it?" His words hit her with a mix of frustration and sadness. Yes, they had agreed to take a break, but that didn't mean he could just ignore her presence in the same city. She still cared, still hoped he did too. "I know we agreed on a break, Henry, but I didn't expect you to just leave me out," she responded, her voice filled with emotion. "We've been in different cities for months, and when you finally come back, I only find out because someone else saw you with another person." Henry took a deep breath. "I understand how that looks, and I'm sorry for not telling you. But I really thought you'd prefer to keep things as they were. I thought you were moving on with your life too." Those words cut deep. Did Henry think she'd already moved on? Had he already done so, and she just didn't want to see it? "Maybe I'm holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore," Emily said, more to herself than to him. "Maybe it's time to really face what's happening here." On the other end of the line, Henry remained silent, as if he too was struggling to find the right words. "Emily, I don't want to lose you. But I also don't know if we can keep going like this, pretending everything will go back to how it was before. We're in such different phases of life now. I'm always traveling, and you are too. We're so distant." Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes. She knew he was right, but hearing it made everything feel more real. "I know," she whispered, "but that doesn't make it any easier." "No, it doesn't," Henry agreed, with a palpable sadness in his voice. "Maybe what we need now is to be honest with ourselves. We both knew this distance would be hard, but maybe it's time to accept that we can't keep doing this." Emily closed her eyes, letting the tears fall. It felt like the end, even though neither of them was ready to say it. "So, this is the end?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Henry hesitated for a long moment before responding. "I think it is, at least for now." His words sealed something Emily had feared from the start. She felt her heart tighten, but deep down, she knew this was the most sensible thing to do. "I didn't want it to end like this," she said, almost in a whisper. "Neither did I, Emily. But maybe this is what's best for both of us right now. It's not fair to you, or to me, to keep forcing something we can't sustain." Emily stayed silent, fighting to keep her emotions in check. After a few more words exchanged, they said goodbye, and she hung up the phone, feeling an immense emptiness take over her. In the days that followed, Emily threw herself even more into work. She knew this was her way of dealing with the grief of the relationship. The breakup with Henry left her emotionally drained, but at the same time, a part of her knew it was what needed to happen. Now, she was free to focus on her career, on her personal goals, but that freedom came with a loneliness that felt overwhelming. She immersed herself in negotiations with the Asian company, leading the project flawlessly. The meetings and trips became her new routine, and Mike's and the Donovan and Greer directors' praise kept coming. But despite all this, she couldn't shake the emptiness left by the breakup. One night, while working from home, Megan showed up unexpectedly. "I brought pizza and wine," she said, walking in without waiting for an invitation, as she always did. "I think you need a night to vent and forget about the world for a few hours." Emily smiled, grateful for her friend's presence, but she knew that this pain would take time to heal. The months that followed Emily and Henry's final breakup were undoubtedly the most challenging of Emily's life. The void he left was immense, and even though she was surrounded by professional success, there was a part of her that felt incomplete. Despite this, Emily knew time wouldn't wait for her, and neither would the business world. Donovan and Greer needed her now more than ever, and if she could no longer count on Henry's love, at least she could rely on her career. The project with the Asian company was in full swing, and Emily led the negotiations masterfully. Every meeting was an opportunity to reaffirm her value, and although the work consumed her, there was something comforting about being needed, about being part of something bigger. If love was slipping through her fingers, professional success was something she could still control. However, success came with a price. Emily spent more nights at the office than at home. Her trips to Asia became frequent, and she found herself constantly buried in contracts and meetings. Megan, always present and loyal, didn't hide her concern. "You're throwing yourself into this work in a way that worries me," Megan said one night as the two of them drank wine in Emily's small apartment. "I get that you need time to deal with the breakup, but I wonder if you're letting yourself feel what you really need to." Emily gave a tired smile, knowing her friend was right. Megan could always see beyond the facade she put up. "I just don't know what else to do, Megan. Work is the only thing that still makes sense. And if I stop for even a second to feel everything, I'm afraid I won't be able to get back up again." Megan nodded, understanding. There was something deep in Emily's eyes, a contained sadness, but also a fierce determination. "You know I'm here whenever you need me, but I don't want to see you losing yourself in this insane work pace. You deserve to be happy outside the office too, you know?" Emily knew Megan was right, but finding her way back to personal happiness seemed more distant every day. And though she didn't want to admit it, she still thought about Henry. What was he doing? Had he truly moved on? There were nights when she'd pick up the phone, wanting to send him a message, but she always stopped at the last second, reminding herself that they had both decided to go their separate ways. Amid this whirlwind of feelings, a new opportunity arose at Donovan and Greer. Mike Donovan called an extraordinary meeting, directly asking Emily to join. The office was buzzing that day, and she could sense something big was about to happen. "Emily, I need you to take on a new responsibility," Mike said as soon as she walked into the meeting room. He was accompanied by other directors, all with serious, focused expressions. "Sure. What do you have in mind?" she asked, trying to stay calm, though she felt that something important was about to be revealed. "We've been approached by a major European company, Vortex Industries. They're interested in a partial merger, which would give us a stronger presence in the European market and potentially in Asia as well. This is huge, Emily. If we can close this deal, Donovan and Greer will move to a whole new level," Mike explained, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Emily felt the weight of his words. A partial merger with Vortex meant not only financial advancement, but also a strategic position in the international market. It was a golden opportunity, and I would be responsible for leading the negotiations? She asked, feeling the excitement rise, but also the weight of responsibility. "Exactly," Mike confirmed. "You've already proven you have the skill to handle international negotiations. Vortex is particularly interested in working with you. This will be the biggest project of your career so far." Emily felt honored by Mike's confidence, but she also knew that this new responsibility would come with immense challenges. She would have to dedicate herself even more, travel more often, and dive into a merger process that could take months or even years to complete. The work would consume her life entirely. "When do we start?" she asked, already mentally preparing for the challenge. "The initial negotiations begin in 2 weeks. You'll need to travel to Paris for the first round of meetings," Mike said, handing her a file with the proposal details. Paris. Emily couldn't help but think about the symbolism. It was the city of love, and now it would be the setting for one of the most important negotiations of her career. The irony didn't escape her, but she tried to push aside romantic thoughts, focusing on what really mattered, the work. 2 weeks later, Emily was on a plane, heading to Paris. The flight was long, but it gave her time to reflect. As she looked out the window, watching the clouds and distant horizon, she thought about how much her life had changed in such a short time. The relationship with Henry, which had once been a central part of her life, now felt like a distant memory, though still painful. Upon landing in Paris, she was greeted by a local team that took her to the hotel and then to the Vortex Industries office. The meetings were intense and complex, as she had expected, but Emily felt at home in that environment. Tough negotiations, elaborate strategies, and long discussions were what she did best. The partial merger with Vortex was a delicate dance, but she was determined to close the deal in the best way possible. Between meetings, however, Emily had small moments of reflection. Paris, with its charming streets, cozy cafes, and romantic atmosphere, made her think about how she had put her personal life aside. During one of the rare moments of free time, while having coffee in a bistro, she picked up her phone and started typing a message to Henry, but once again, she hesitated. What would she say? That she missed him? That Paris made her think of him? Deleting the message, she put the phone back in her bag, determined to stay focused on the present. The weeks in Paris passed quickly. Emily was at her professional peak, leading the negotiations with skill. Vortex Industries seemed more and more inclined to accept the terms proposed by Donovan and Greer, and the partial merger was becoming a reality. Mike sent daily messages from New York, praising Emily's work and making it clear that the success of this deal would change everything for the company. But amid all the success, Emily's loneliness grew. Although she was surrounded by colleagues and a city full of life, the emptiness in her heart remained. She had reached a level of success that many only dreamed of, but at the same time, she felt that something essential was missing. The work, as gratifying as it was, didn't fill the space left by the absence of a deep emotional connection. One night, while walking along the banks of the Seine River, with the Eiffel Tower illuminated in the background, Emily allowed herself to think about Henry again. Where was he at that moment? Still traveling through Europe? Did he ever think about her? The breakup, which had seemed so logical months ago, now left her with a sense of irreparable loss. She realized that no matter how much she threw herself into work, she couldn't completely erase the pain. Suddenly, her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was an unexpected message. Her heart raced when she saw the name on the screen. "Hey, Emily. I know it's been a while, but I'm in Paris for a meeting and thought of you. Maybe we could meet up?" It was Henry. Emily stood still for a moment, staring at the message. Paris, the city where everything seemed possible, was about to bring back something she thought she had lost forever. Emily stared at Henry's message for several minutes, unable to fully process what she was feeling. There was a mix of emotions she didn't know how to handle: surprise, longing, anxiety, and a pain that hadn't completely healed. Paris, the city that now played a central role in her professional life, also carried an inescapable aura of romance, and the fact that Henry was so close stirred everything she had been trying to overcome. She typed a reply, hesitating several times before finally sending it. "Hey, Henry. Paris, huh? Maybe it's fate. We can meet, sure. When?" As soon as she sent the message, Emily felt a slight wave of regret. What was she doing? They had decided to go their separate ways, and now, after months of no contact, Henry was reappearing as if time hadn't passed. Part of her wanted to ignore the message, but another, stronger part wanted answers. She wanted to know what he was feeling, what he wanted from this meeting. Within minutes, her phone vibrated again with his response. "How about tomorrow night? 8 o'clock, at Café de Flore?" Café de Flore was one of the most famous and historic cafes in Paris, known for its charm and history. The perfect place for a meeting, or maybe for a reunion. Emily agreed, sending a quick confirmation message, and spent the rest of the night trying to focus on work. But her mind kept returning to that message, to the idea of seeing him again. The next day, Emily immersed herself in the Vortex Industries meetings with more intensity than ever, trying to keep her focus away from Henry. The negotiations were reaching a crucial point, and she knew that any mistake could cost the success of the partial merger. Even so, the anticipation of that evening's meeting lingered in her mind like a persistent shadow. At 7:30, Emily returned to the hotel, took a quick shower, and got ready. She looked at herself in the mirror, questioning whether she was doing the right thing. A part of her hadn't yet moved on from the end of their relationship, and seeing Henry again might reopen wounds she had worked so hard to heal. But there was also a sense that this meeting was necessary, that she needed closure, or perhaps a new beginning. At 8 o'clock sharp, Emily arrived at Café de Flore. The place was filled with tourists and Parisians, with soft lights and muffled conversations creating a cozy atmosphere. She walked in looking around, and then she saw him. Henry was sitting at a table near the window, with a view of the busy streets of Paris. He looked different, yet familiar. His hair was a little longer, and he was wearing a casual suit, as usual, but his face looked more tired. When his eyes met hers, he smiled, and at that moment, Emily knew this meeting would change everything. She approached slowly, trying to keep her composure. "Hi, Henry," she said with a light smile, sitting across from him. "Hi, Emily. It's good to see you," he replied with a smile that carried a mix of longing and relief. The first few minutes were awkward, filled with brief glances and comments about what each was doing in Paris. It was as if they were testing the waters, trying to figure out how to address the real reason they were there. Finally, Henry sighed and broke the ice. "I thought a lot before sending you that message," he said, resting his elbows on the table in a gesture of vulnerability. "I didn't know if you wanted to see me, but I had to try." Emily nodded, understanding his hesitation, while still trying to process her feelings. She wasn't sure if she was ready to reopen those wounds, but now that they were face to face, there was no escaping it. "I didn't know if I wanted to see you either," she admitted sincerely. "But deep down, I think I always knew this meeting was inevitable. We have things we never resolve." "Henry," he nodded in agreement. "I know." Henry paused, looking deeply into her eyes. "Emily, I never stopped thinking about you. And no matter how much I tried to move on, there was always something pulling me back. I thought work, the distance, all of that would be enough to make me forget, but I was wrong." His words hit Emily in a way she hadn't expected. It was exactly what she had feared hearing, but also what she had secretly wanted. She knew their lives had taken different paths, but what they felt for each other had never completely faded. "I haven't stopped thinking about you either, Henry," she said, her voice slightly trembling. "But at the same time, we both know that what we went through was hard. The distance, the work, all of it pulled us apart, and I don't know if we're ready to go through that again." Henry nodded, understanding the dilemma. He knew they couldn't just go back to the past and pretend everything would be fine. There were real issues that needed to be resolved. "I know it won't be easy," he said in a more serious tone, "but honestly, I'm willing to try. I don't know what will happen, but I want to find out. If you want that too." Emily looked at him, feeling her heart race. The idea of trying again was tempting, but also filled with uncertainties. Both were at crucial moments in their careers, with more responsibilities than ever. In the distance, the problem that had initially separated them was still there. "Henry, you're asking me to go back to something that almost destroyed us the first time," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I feel something for you, and I know you feel the same, but we have to be realistic. Our lives are complicated. What's changed since the last time?" Henry observed her for a moment, realizing that honesty was the only answer. "What's changed, Emily, is that I've realized that, with or without complications, I'd rather face those challenges with you than alone. Life will always be difficult, the commitments will always be there, but I don't want to keep being away from you. I want to try again, this time knowing exactly what we're up against." Emily was silent for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. She knew there were no guarantees, but she also knew the feelings between them were still strong. The desire to try again was there, but so was the fear of repeating the same mistakes. I'm not sure if I'm ready for this," she admitted sincerely. "I want to, but I'm scared, and I don't want us to hurt each other again." Henry smiled gently, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I'm scared too, Emily, but what I feel for you is stronger than that fear. And if you're willing to try, so am I." She looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions. Fear and hope intertwined within her. Paris, with all its charm and romance, seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start. But she knew real life was far more complicated than a movie scene. Finally, she squeezed his hand back, feeling that maybe, just maybe, they were ready to try again. The days that followed their reunion at Café de Flore brought a sense of lightness to Emily and Henry. They decided that this time, they would do things differently. There was a renewed trust between them, and the promise of total honesty seemed to be the guiding thread of this new beginning. However, both Emily and Henry knew that, while their reunion in Paris had been romantic, real life would soon return with all its complexities. Emily was still deeply involved in the negotiations for the partial merger between Donovan and Greer and Vortex Industries, and Henry continued leading the expansion of Collins enterprises around the world. Both of their jobs required not only constant travel, but also exhaustive dedication. Balancing their relationship with professional responsibilities wouldn't be easy. But now, they were aware of the challenges ahead. On her last day in Paris, Emily decided to take a few hours to relax before returning to New York. She and Henry spent the afternoon together, walking along the banks of the Seine, without talking much about the future, simply enjoying the moment. When the time came to say goodbye, the tension of another separation hung in the air. "I'm going back to New York tomorrow," Emily said as they walked hand in hand. "I have an important meeting with the board as soon as I arrive. The negotiations with Vortex are entering the final stretch." Henry nodded, knowing Emily's work was at a critical point. "I've also got a busy few weeks ahead. Collins is opening new offices in Germany, and I'll need to be there for a while," he said, stopping and turning to face her. "But that doesn't mean we'll stop talking. I want to keep in touch, Emily. I want this to work." Emily smiled, recognizing his effort. "I wanted to work too, Henry. Let's do it right this time. Deal?" He pulled her closer, wrapping her in a firm embrace. "Deal." The goodbye was brief, but full of meaning. Both knew they were entering a new phase, where distance would still be a challenge. But now there was a mutual understanding that they were willing to fight for what they shared. Back in New York, Emily threw herself into work. The final meetings for the merger with Vortex were approaching, and Mike Donovan called her into a series of strategic sessions. The atmosphere in the office was tense, but also optimistic. Everyone knew that if the merger succeeded, Donovan and Greer would become a dominant force in the international market. "Emily, I need you to be 100% focused in the coming weeks," Mike said during a closed meeting. "Vortex is happy with the terms we've proposed, but there are still some issues that need to be resolved before signing the agreement. And I trust you to lead this." Emily nodded, feeling the pressure. She knew this project would be crucial for both the company and her career. She wanted to excel, to have all her hard work recognized, but at the same time, she couldn't help thinking about Henry and the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. "You can count on me, Mike. I'm ready," she replied confidently. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Henry stayed in constant contact. They exchanged messages, had quick video calls, and even shared little gestures like sending photos of interesting places they came across during their travels. Both were committed to not letting the distance turn into silence. The connection, though limited by geography, remained strong, and each conversation seemed to strengthen their bond. But, as always, life wouldn't take long to throw new challenges their way. One morning, while Emily was in a meeting, her phone buzzed with a notification that made her heart race. It was a message from Megan. "Henry is in New York. I saw him with some Collins executives at a restaurant near the office. Did you know he was in town?" Emily felt a wave of confusion. Henry hadn't mentioned that he was coming to New York, and it bothered her. Not because she didn't trust him, but because their promise of honesty meant there would be no more surprises between them. As soon as she had a break in her schedule, Emily decided to call Henry. "Hey, Henry, everything okay?" She began, trying to keep her tone casual. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just a bit busy with work," he replied, with a slight hesitation in his voice. "Megan told me she saw you in New York today. I didn't know you were in town," she said, trying to hide her disappointment. On the other end of the line, Henry was silent for a moment before responding. "It's true. I'm in New York. It was a last-minute trip. We're finalizing a big deal with an important partner here, and I just didn't have time to tell you," he explained, trying to sound casual. Emily felt a pang in her chest. She knew Henry's work was intense and unpredictable, but the fact that he hadn't mentioned his arrival in New York bothered her more than she wanted to admit. "I see, but I thought we agreed to be more open with each other about these things," she said, with a tone that was soft but firm. Henry sighed, realizing he had failed in the agreement they had made. "You're right, Emily. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I should have said something, but things got so hectic that I got distracted." She wanted to believe he was being sincere, but the feeling that something was shifting between them made her question whether they were truly ready to handle all the pressures of their busy lives. "It's okay. I want us to be honest with each other. We're trying to make this work, Henry, but we need to put in the effort to make it happen," she said, trying to make her feelings clear. "I know, and you're right. I'll do better. I promise," he said, more seriously. "How about we have dinner tomorrow? I'll still be here, and I'd love to see you." Emily agreed, accepting the invitation, but she couldn't shake the feeling that time and distance continued to create invisible barriers between them. The next evening, Emily and Henry met at an elegant restaurant in downtown New York. He was more relaxed, and they talked about work, life, and tried to keep the mood light. But even so, Emily noticed that something had changed. The long absences and the relentless pace of their careers were taking a toll. "I've been thinking a lot about us, Henry," she said as they dined, "about how we're dealing with the distance in our busy lives." Henry looked at her intently, sensing that this was an important conversation. "What have you been thinking?" he asked, with a slight tension in his voice. Emily took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "I want this to work, I really do, but I'm afraid that, eventually, we'll drift apart again. We're in such complicated moments in our careers, and no matter how hard we try, it seems like work always gets in the way." Henry nodded, understanding what she was saying. "I think about that too, Emily, but I don't want to give up on us. I know it's hard right now, but I believe we can find a way to make it work. I don't know how yet, but I'm willing to try." His gaze was sincere, and Emily knew he was being honest. But the fear that their careers would end up eroding what they were trying to build left her feeling uneasy. "I want to try too, Henry, but we need to find a way to balance our lives. We can't keep going like this, always running, always on the verge of separation," she said, her voice soft but determined. Henry nodded again, holding her hand across the table. "We'll find that balance, Emily. I won't let this destroy us." And with that promise, they both knew the road ahead would be full of challenges. But this time, they were determined to face them together. "We'll try, Henry, but on one condition. We have to be honest about everything, about what we want and what we need. We can't repeat the same mistakes." Henry smiled, relieved, and nodded. "Deal. I promise." In that moment, as the lights of Paris glowed in the background, and the two of them looked at each other with renewed hope, Emily felt they were starting a new chapter. They didn't know what the future held, but they were ready to face it together. The year that followed Emily and Henry's reunion in Paris was a roller coaster of emotions, challenges, and successes, both personally and professionally. The promise to try again kept them connected, but as they had feared, the demands of their careers continued to throw obstacles in their path. They faced the reality of their commitments, long trips, international mergers, and business decisions that often placed them on different continents. Emily successfully led the negotiations between Donovan and Greer and Vortex Industries, which ultimately resulted in a partial merger. The transition to the new partnership was intense, but also extremely rewarding. Her work placed her at the center of important strategic discussions and financial decisions that shaped the company's future on the international stage. Meanwhile, Henry was increasingly busy with the expansion of Collins enterprises throughout Europe and Asia, overseeing new offices and handling million-dollar contracts that propelled the company to new heights. Despite their success, the balance between work and relationship remained a challenge. The constant contact through messages and video calls helped keep the spark alive, but often, both felt the physical absence of the other. When they did manage to see each other, their meetings were brief, filled with discussions about what was happening in their professional lives, and they rarely had time to relax and simply enjoy each other's company. One afternoon, Emily was in her New York office, reviewing important documents for a final meeting with the Vortex board, when her phone rang. It was Henry. "Hey, Henry," she said, smiling at the sound of his voice, always a relief amid the chaos of work. "How are things in Germany?" Henry was supervising the opening of a new Collins office in Berlin, and the trip had lasted longer than either of them had expected. "Everything's going well, as much as possible. But I'm tired of being so far from you," he said, with a tone of exhaustion in his voice. "We need to see each other soon. I can't stand this distance anymore." Emily sighed, knowing he was right. She missed him too, but at the same time, she was deeply immersed in her work. Still, part of her heart longed to be near Henry, to experience the simplicity of being together without the pressures of work interfering. "I miss you too," she admitted, fidgeting with her desk, trying to stay focused. "I have some important meetings this week, but maybe next weekend I can travel to see you." On the other end of the line, Henry was silent for a few moments, as if pondering something important. "I've been thinking," he began slowly. "What if we take a break from all of this? Not from the relationship, but from work. I mean, we're always running, and we never have time for us. What if we took some time to travel together, away from everything?" Henry's proposal took Emily by surprise. A break from work? Traveling together? She could hardly imagine what that would mean, as work had become her life over the past few years. But at the same time, something inside her lit up at the idea of spending real time with Henry, without deadlines, without contracts, without pressure. I've never thought about that before," she said slowly, trying to process the idea. "But maybe you're right. Maybe we do need time for ourselves." Henry seemed relieved to hear her response. "What do you think about a trip to somewhere we can just live? No schedules, no responsibilities, just us. Where do you have in mind?" Emily asked, feeling excited for the first time in weeks at the idea of a break. "How about Tuscany?" Henry suggested. "A quiet place, full of vineyards and incredible landscapes. We can rent a house and spend a few days not thinking about anything but each other." Emily smiled. The idea seemed almost utopian, but at the same time, irresistible. "I'd love that. Let's do it," she said, with genuine excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. "Then it's settled. I'll take care of everything and let you know when it's ready," Henry replied, with a tone of relief and happiness in his voice. 2 weeks later, Emily and Henry met in Tuscany, as they had planned. They rented a house in the middle of vineyards, surrounded by rolling hills and fields of sunflowers. The environment was perfect for a break from the frenetic world they both lived in, and for the first time in months, they both felt they could truly relax. The house was a peaceful refuge, with a porch offering a panoramic view of the stunning landscape, where the sky seemed to merge with the distant mountains. The air was fresh, the sound of cicadas filled the afternoon, and the scent of ripe grapes wafted through the air. It was as if their time passed differently, slower, gentler. On the first morning, Henry and Emily walked through the vineyards near the house, enjoying the simplicity of the place. It was a radical change from what they were used to. The rush of New York, the luxurious offices, the endless meetings. There, Everything seemed to quiet down, and for the first time in a long time, they had time for themselves. As they walked, Henry held Emily's hand, pulling her closer. "This is the perfect place to leave everything behind, isn't it?" he said, with a peaceful smile on his face. Emily nodded, feeling at peace in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Yes, I could stay here forever." The Tuscan sun bathed their faces, and for a moment, there was nothing else in the world but the two of them. The worries that had once dominated their lives had dissipated, leaving room only for the present, for what they felt for each other. That night, Henry prepared a simple dinner in the house's rustic kitchen, and they ate on the porch with a bottle of local wine to accompany it. The sky was painted orange and pink, and the stars began to appear, one by one, as the silence of the night took over the landscape. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," Henry said softly as he swirled the wine in his glass. "And I know our careers are important to both of us, but I don't want them to keep pushing us apart. I want work to be part of our lives, but I don't want it to be everything." Emily looked at him, feeling the same weight in her own reflections. She knew she was at a crucial point in her career, but she also knew that the emptiness she felt when she was away from Henry couldn't be filled by professional success alone. "I've been thinking about that too," she said, placing her wine glass on the table and holding his hand. "Work has always been my priority, but now I realize I need more. I need you. We both deserve something beyond schedules and contracts." Henry watched her for a few moments, his eyes reflecting the same intensity of feelings that she felt. "Then let's find that balance together. No matter what comes next, as long as we don't lose what we have." Emily smiled, feeling her heart lighten. There, on that porch under the Tuscan stars, she realized she had found something much more precious than professional success. She had found the person with whom she wanted to share her life, fully and authentically, without the barriers that the business world imposed. "I love you, Henry," she said, her voice soft but firm, "and I'm willing to make this work, to find the balance between what we love to do and what we love to feel." Henry smiled, leaning closer to her. "I love you too, Emily, and I'll do everything to make this work. For us." That moment seemed to encapsulate everything they had been through, from the tense days in New York to the challenges they faced with the distance. There, under the Tuscan stars, nothing else mattered, just the two of them and the promise of a shared future. Without more words, Henry leaned in closer, his eyes meeting hers with a softness that said more than any sentence could. He gently pulled her toward him, and his lips met hers in a long, deep kiss, a kiss that spoke of all they had overcome, of all the promises still to come. Emily kissed him back with the same intensity, feeling her heart race, but at the same time, at peace. That kiss was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for their lives together, but of a more balanced and sincere way of living. They were no longer fighting against time, against distances, or against the world. They were finally ready to face everything together, as it always should have been. When the kiss ended, they pulled back slightly, still holding hands, and sat in silence, simply appreciating each other's presence. The moon shone high in the sky, reflecting off the glass of wine on the table, and the night seemed to embrace them with its tranquility. It was the beginning of a new phase, a phase where love, work, and the future would walk side by side, but this time, in harmony.